Hello, Sage Man here. Finally managed to speed through a podcast in slightly less than a month. And this is the last episode done from my mom's house in Colorado. Can we pretend that's true and that I actually managed to finish this podcast before leaving? No? Okay. The truth is, I finally got an apartment in Quincy, Illinois, and that is where I am. For 6 years now, I've been wishing to come back here and get back in with the theater community and launch a creative community of my very own. Community isn't an easy thing right now, state of the world being what it is, the planet ravaged by disease. But we have the internet, and I think we can make some stuff from safe distances. Hopefully there'll come a time when this podcast can return to its original function of catching you up on actual progress on TAPAS projects. Though it will still have the segment where I watch Disney films for at least another 2 years. I really ought to have given that its own video series, but it started as a podcast segment, so I can't bear to make it not that anymore. I need to finish the things I start. It's a terrible vice, truly. So, Keys and Kingdoms. I've recently finished a massive series of blog entries where I compiled literally everything I've ever known about the world, the game, and assorted media, all the way up to the parts I discussed in last week's podcast. So, next I need to compile all that information in an organized fashion, instead of being a cluster of information that just happens to all be in one place. I started a private wiki, and little by little I'm folding everything I know into that. Now, one thing I know for sure is that I am definitely no longer having Keys and Kingdoms work under the logic of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, as has been the plan for a long time. We need, once again, to make up our own system. Therefore, I've been looking at gaming systems designed to help you make your own gaming systems. There's Fudge, a customizable engine that's been around since 1995-ish. That is to say, I acquired the 1995 edition of its rules. I don't know anything about its status before or after that, but it's really good. It's especially got really good rules for creature size, which is, of course, the biggest thing the rules of Keys and Kingdoms really needs. I've also been looking at Cogent. It's an in-testing system created by Shad Brooks, who's a YouTuber I follow, an expert in weapons and medieval history who also loves gaming and nerd stuff. When he mentioned in a video that he had a gaming system of his own that he was working on, I immediately grabbed a copy, certain it would be just as helpful as Fudge. And finally, there's Mistrunner, a system co-created by my friend Randy Wolfmeyer. He's not entirely satisfied with the results that the main creator of the system produced, and what he wants for his system, it all seems very similar to what I want for Keys and Kingdoms. I haven't looked at these systems very thoroughly because I've been working very hard on gathering the data for the blogs I was doing, just everything I already knew about K&K, not what I wanted to find out later. Gonna look at it pretty carefully at some point. I imagine Randy will be helping out. I approached him and he expressed some wistfulness at having been off game design for a while and wanting to get back to it. I think I'll reach out to him today when I'm done here. Additionally, Keys and Kingdoms is no longer the name of the game system. It is specifically the name of the Disney-inspired campaign setting. There will be other campaign settings, and the central game thingy, well, doesn't have a name yet. I'm leaving that to Randy. He'll figure it out. Name is important, and I'm bad at them, so we're taking our time. Anyway, let's do the movies. Today we're covering the 3 movies in my collection released in 1995, and all 3 are extremely notable. 95 must have been a big year. In release order, and also seemingly the order of least to most notable, we're starting with a Goofy movie. This was an early work of the Florida studio, and is seemingly in continuity with the animated sitcom Goof Troop. But despite this, it's a theatrical release with a theatrical budget and a very well-remembered film. Let's dive into it. We open in a dream sequence, a dream being had by Goofy's son, one Max Goof. The character of Max dates back to the Goofy cartoons of the 1950s. These cartoons depicted Goofy as a suburban average Joe, and every so often these situations gave him a young son known then as Goofy Jr. The TV series Goof Troop, which began and ended its 78-episode run in '92, Disney TV seasons are weird, put Goofy back in the suburban dad role, but characterized him more clearly as Goofy instead of a generic everyman. And that show brought along Max and gave him his modern design and name. Most characters of the classic Disney shorts debuted in the late 20s, early 30s, and their aesthetics and personalities continue to reflect that. In their appearances from the 80s onward, they occasionally acknowledge that they're rather old-fashioned people. Max, conversely, despite his 50s debut, is pure concentrated 90s in his design and personality, and it serves him very well as a character. Despite how very 90s this film and its preceding TV series are, the film, at least, is grounded enough that it makes the 90s feel just as timeless as 50s suburbia. In Goof Troop, Max was about 10 years old and voiced by Dana Hill. In this film, I believe he's a high school freshman, so 14, 15 years of age, and while the other three main actors of Goof Troop reprise their roles in a Goofy movie, Max is now voiced by Jason Marsden, who would play the character again, whenever he's seen in a teenage form. This film gave the character the versatility of being either a kid or a teen, depending on what the story needs the son of Goofy to be. This was Marsden's breakout role as a voice actor. We've already discussed him playing Binks in Hocus Pocus, but this really rocketed him to voiceover stardom. He's among my all-time favorites, not only because of his just amazing voice, but because it was by watching The Weekenders and realizing that Tino Tonatini was played by the same actor as Max that I realized voice acting is done by actual actors who, if they're good at their job, are insanely prolific throughout the cartoon and gaming world. In the past, I guess I just assumed it was part of the animation process, done by the crew. Now I know. Thank you, Jason. Anyway, Max's dream is about an amorous encounter with his crush Roxanne, played by Kelly Martin. Roxanne is a great character. It's a shame her only appearance after this film was in one episode of House of Mouse, though there is a Christmas special where Max has a new love interest, also voiced by Kelly Martin, but why didn't they just use Roxanne for that story? She's not only very sexy for a dog girl, they gave her very sensual eyes and a beauty mark, but she also has such a kind and tender personality that you can very much see she's not just popular and the object of Max's affections because she's hot. She earned it. But anyway, we've not yet met the real Roxanne, just this idealized version in Max's dream, and that dream swiftly becomes a nightmare when Max finds himself quite literally becoming his father. A nightmare we've all had, I'm sure. Max wakes up and gets ready for school. He has big plans, but first he has to get past his dad, Goofy, played again by Bill Farmer. I probably gave this spiel earlier, but Bill Farmer has been Goofy's official voice since 1990 and remains such today. In the 80s, when Disney's core cast started making a comeback after having faded into obscurity after Walt Disney's death, Goofy went through voice actors. Voiceover legends Hal Smith, Tony Pope, and Will Ryan all took cracks at it in various projects, but it was Bill Farmer, a total noob to the voice acting world, who really managed to recapture the character. No one else has played the role since 1990, and I'd say Bill Farmer's brilliant performance is a huge part of the reason that Goofy got his own sitcom in 2 movies. Donald and Mickey really can't touch him in that regard. Donald's been in a few TV shows, but always overshadowed by Scrooge and the 3 nephews. And Mickey, well, he's never really headlined anything without his 2 buddies backing him up. As Max makes his way to the last day of school before summer vacation, he and his classmates sing the movie's first musical number, After Today. Max's singing voice is done by a guy called Aaron Lohr. Marsden has explained that he could have done his own singing in the film, but he botched his audition. He didn't give the producers the kind of singing voice they wanted for the character. Had he known what they were aiming for, Lohr probably would have never gotten the call. I've seen convention appearances where Bill Farmer sings songs from the film, and he does it with Marsden, not with Lohr. Wonder whatever happened to Lohr. After Today is very iconic. The musical numbers in this film aren't like the huge Broadway numbers of the Renaissance. You have Goofy's musical numbers, which are simple and old-fashioned, plus some songs from the discography of Max's favorite artist, Powerline. who's kind of conceived as a hybrid of Michael Jackson and Prince. And they're very bombastic pop rock stuff. And then this number, basically being Max's solo, it's it's quite unique. It's very simple rock, I guess. I don't know the technicals of music genres, but you get my point. After Today, very iconic. We see all sorts of 90s high school archetypes, most of whom shoot Max dirty looks, displaying clearly that he's at the bottom of the social totem pole. It's after the number that Max has what may very well be his first ever actual encounter with Roxanne, as he stammers incoherently when he realizes who he's talking to, and when they share a laugh, Max's evolves into a characteristic Bill Farmer-provided yuck, much to his embarrassment. In school, and it is so interesting to see modern things like high school lockers and later hot tubs in traditional animation. There have been traditionally animated films set in modern times before, but I don't know, this film is just so mundane that it's somehow super extra fascinating. Anyway, Max meets with his best friend PJ, played as in the series by Rob Paulsen. PJ originated as Pete Jr., who I think dates back to about a decade earlier than Goofy Jr., has had a couple appearances in the early 40s, and then both juniors, they were brought back and modernized for Goof Troop. PJ, unlike Max, has never made any appearances outside of the Goof Troop continuity. Max has fared a little better. He was in House of Mouse, he was in some Christmas specials, though Max sadly hasn't been seen since 2004. PJ, as a character, is just always very neurotic and timid, and in this context, he's pretty uncertain about the scheme Max is cooking up. The pair of them, along with their aggressively 90s friend Bobby Zimmerowski, played by the aggressively 90s Pauly Shore. Shore is uncredited in this film, but manages to score a much larger role in the sequel. Like a lot of celebrities who voice Disney characters, the role of Bobby is easily the highest point of Pauly Shore's career. Later in the day, this final day of school, we get a speech from the student body president Stacy, played by Jenna Von Oy. Again, this represents something pretty cool. Stacy is incredibly nerdy in her style and mannerisms, but she's clearly the most popular girl in school, and she's far more outgoing and sociable than her much hotter best friend Roxanne. So, I don't know, I like that. I'd like that they weren't diving into the cliches about cliques that had become commonplace since the 80s. Stacy is hosting a party the following week in which invitees will be watching a Powerline concert from Los Angeles live on pay-per-view on her big screen TV. And here we meet Principal Mazer, played by Wallace Shawn. And this wouldn't be the only time Wallace Shawn voiced a strict, out-of-touch, toupee-wearing school principal in a Disney cartoon. He'd do that again later in the show Teacher's Pet. That's awfully specific, but he certainly seems like the type. It is, in fact, conceivable. It's during the principal's speech that Max, PJ, and Bobby implement their plan. Max pops out dressed like Powerline and lip syncs to his song Stand Out, complete with pyrotechnics, wire work, and some pretty legit 90s dance moves. While the student body is extremely impressed, Principal Mazer is not. We cut to Goofy at work. Apparently, in this movie, Goofy and Pete work at a photo kiosk in some kind of department store. I don't know what Goofy did for a living in Goof Troop, but here he works at a photo kiosk, and in the sequel he works at a toy factory. The plot of the sequel kicks off because Goofy decides to finish college so he can get less menial jobs, so my guess would be that Goofy constantly having different jobs is a running gag in Goof Troop that continued into the movies until, he decided to stomp on it by going to college, but I couldn't tell you for sure. And then why does Pete work at the photo kiosk too? I'm fairly certain he was a used car salesman in the show. A mystery for another day. Let's talk about Pete. Pete is Disney's oldest animated character, dating back to a 1925 installment of the Alice comedies, a series of silent films made in the early to mid-20s about a live-action girl called Alice interacting with an animated world. Pete was a bear in the Alice comedies before being reimagined as a cat when he co-starred with Mickey in Steamboat Willie. Though his modern design is very dog-like, he fits in perfectly among the all-dog-native cast of Goof Troop, save that he and PJ are the only characters whose ears are sharp instead of floppy. Disney lore maintains that he is still a cat. It's referenced very seldom, but He is called a cat more often than Goofy is referred to as a dog, at any rate. I may have said all that in previous episodes, I don't know. Pete did appear in the Christmas Carol and Prince and the Pauper cartoons, so surely I must have talked about him then, but here's something I definitely couldn't say about Pete before. He is played by Jim Cummings, who first took the role in Goof Troop, and I gotta say, Jim Cummings playing Pete is just about one of the best bits of voice work of all time. He fully revamped the character, just like Bill Farmer did with Goofy. Pete may not be as recognizable as the core Disney cast he so often antagonizes, but I've gotta love the guy. His scheming and mischief and that completely inimitable gruff voice Jim gives him. And that accent, what is that accent? Pete clearly has an American accent, but not one from any part of the country I'm aware of. So anyway, that rounds out the main cast of Goof Troop, Goofy and Pete, and their sons Max and PJ. The Pete family don't play a huge role in the Goofy movies, but they're there, which is more than can be said for PJ's mother and sister, who are never once referenced in the Goofy movie duology. The movies give the impression that Pete is a single father with an only child, just like Goofy is. As for the identity of Max's mother, well, don't ask, never explored, I don't imagine we'll ever find out. As they work, Pete and Goofy discuss their plans for the summer. Pete is taking PJ camping, while Goofy doesn't think Max would go for that. Pete expresses suspicion of a teenage boy who won't hang out with his dad, and plants some seeds of doubt in Goofy's mind about Max being a good kid. As PJ, Bobby, and Max are one by one berated by the principal for their stunt, Roxanne and Max have their iconic moment where their hands touch, while he helps her pick up the papers she dropped. Roxanne expresses her appreciation of Max's song and dance number, and they agree that seeing each other at Stacy's party next weekend is a date. Max is triumphant about the results of his scheme, but in the meantime, Mazer calls Goofy at work and spins a horror story about Max looking like a gangster and starting a riot, precisely what Pete had been musing about a moment ago, and recommends he get his son under control before his ass gets executed. Jesus Christ, Mazer, tone it down. Goofy is briefly terrified, but then he remembers the times his father took him fishing on Lake Destiny way out in Idaho, and decides to follow Pete's advice and arrange such a trip for himself and Max. As school lets out, Max is very suddenly the most popular guy in school, and PJ has a very out-of-character moment where he celebrates the success of their stunt and starts a big crowd chant. We never do learn what Pete's reaction was to PJ's participation in the event. I don't think PJ is too off the mark in his fears that his dad would kill him, you know? But, Pete and PJ seem to get along fine through the rest of the movie. A few loose threads in the script, I suppose, but the script isn't about the Pete family, you know. When Max gets home, Goofy is too fearful to admonish Max for his misbehavior. Instead, just drops the bombshell on him that they're going on a fishing trip right now, introducing a few important plot elements like the family fishing pole and the map that's been used for the trip for generations. From the looks of the map, it seems that the city where Goof Troop takes place, I believe it's called Spoonerville, is in Ohio. Cool. Briefly looking up Spoonerville on the Disney Wiki confirms to me that most fans have also come to the same conclusion, based on the map, but despite this and a few other moments from the series that might indicate Ohio, it is impossible to nail down Spoonerville's location in the USA based on Goof Troop continuity, that, like Springfield from The Simpsons, all the evidence is self-contradictory. Regardless, let's take the map as the only canon we need. They drive all the way from Ohio to Idaho to go fishing. It's a bit much, but hey, it is a family tradition. Here's another interesting detail on the map. The writing saying that this map belongs to, and then below that, Walter P. Goofy is crossed out, and Benjamin Goofy is crossed out, and then at the end it says all Goofies. So apparently Goofy's family name is Goofy, spelled Goofey. That's interesting. Max is regularly referred to as Max Goof, and Goofy often addressed as Mr. Goof in the context of this series. While fans logically conclude that this makes Goofy's full name Goofy Goof, that name has never canonically been spoken. So apparently at some point the Goofy family changed their name to Goof. Happens sometimes, you know. Donald Trump's family used to be called Drumpf, and yes, that is the only example I can think of, I'm so sorry. On a similar note, Pete's family name, according to the Goof Troop continuity, is Pete, which we know because his son is called PJ Pete, his wife is called Peg Pete, and so, though like Goofy, this is never spoken in series, that makes him Pete Pete. It's one of those things that you just have to extrapolate and wonder why the creators didn't think it through when obviously all the fans were going to, like how if Mario and Luigi are the Mario brothers, that means their names are Luigi Mario and Mario Mario, right? Anyway, I'm not here to analyze Disney canon. I'm here for K&K ideas, and I mean, we probably won't find a lot here. This is a very slice-of-life movie set in the 90s, and all the natives are dogs, but we'll see. Max initially refuses to come along, but Goofy puts his foot down and forces him, only briefly letting slip his fears about Max's behavior and future. Max does manage to convince Goofy at least to let him go to Roxanne's house to cancel his appearance at the party. Roxanne's dad is a hulking brute who never says a word and is clearly very protective of his daughter's innocence. I don't like dads like that. It comes across very possessive in a creepy way, and those dads' teenage daughters need to stop calling their dads daddy. The whole dynamic comes across really sexual and weird. Let your daughters grow the fuck up, people. Did they digitally erase Roxanne's dad's butt crack for the Disney Plus version? I think they did. I'm pretty sure he used to have a butt crack. So, Max tries to cancel their date, and Roxanne is so visibly disappointed that he cooks up a lie about why this father-son trip is important enough to cancel. He claims that Goofy is taking him all the way to LA to see the Powerline concert, that Goofy and Powerline are old friends, and that he'll send her a personal greeting when he and Goofy join Powerline on stage for the final number. Even by the standards of lies, that's a big, big lie. He must have rolled big on his bluff check, because Roxanne has no doubts. Let's talk about bluffing. Bluffing is a common skill in D&D and other RPGs. In 5th edition, they rename it to deception, more informative that way. When your character tells a lie, you have to roll your bluff check. The bigger the lie, the higher you have to roll. But generally, if you roll higher to bluff than the other person does on their people reading skills, they don't know you're lying. There's a spell called Glibness, a very low-level spell called Glibness, which raises your bluff skill so damn high that it's just about impossible to fail. And a number of gamers have a certain misconception about bluffing, namely that if you succeed on a bluff check, that's it. The person you're lying to believes you 100%. Not so. Good dungeon masters know that a successful bluff check just means that the mark finds you poker-faced and difficult to read, not that you can say anything and they'll take it to heart. If you bluff something that's literally unbelievable, you have to roll pretty high, but glibness makes such a target very reachable. Like you lie that you're a god, or you're the king, or you're Napoleon, or whatever. Succeeding on that bluff check doesn't mean the target believes you are who you say you are. It means they believe that you believe what you're saying. So it's off to the Napoleon ward of the local insane asylum for you. Just something that we might want to make explicit in the social skills section in the K&K rulebook. In fact, note to self, put that Napoleon Ward joke in the rulebook. After a few failed attempts at bonding with Max over travel games and music, Goofy fires up the film's second musical number, depending on whether you count Stand Out as a number, hard to say. The Open Road. It's a pretty fun parody of classic Hollywood musical numbers, where everyone in town gets a line. Various other people on the highway, in this case, get lines of their own, including some saloon gals, a guy in a paddy wagon on his way to prison, a crazy cat lady, some newlyweds, firefighters, florists, all the people you always see in such saccharine opening numbers, No mailman for some reason. These songs always need a mailman. Near the end of the song, they get more spoofy with it by including a guy tied up in the trunk of a car, some hearse drivers, and the corpse in the back of the hearse, all singing cheerfully about the open road. Parodies like this one of crowd musical numbers are a trope in their own right. You see parodies in Monty Python's Meaning of Life and in the 2011 Muppets film that, parody this, whole town song more than play it straight, but it's so funny and charming. I'd very much love to pull off a gag like this song. Most notably in the number, there's some nuns. They're a running gag throughout the whole movie. It seems that no matter where Goofy and Max go on their trip, this group of nuns has the same destination. And we also see Mickey and Donald hitchhiking, which messes with the continuity of the Goof Troop universe a bit. Everyone's supposed to be a dog. Vaguely canine cartoon humanoids like this film's cast are called dog faces by animation historians, and I briefly considered using that term while I was inventing natives. Say Goofy is a dog-faced native, Donald is a duck-faced native, and so on, but I dropped that concept when I decided there shouldn't be any limitations on what kind of animal a native can be, just limitations on what it can't. But maybe when natives describe one another, yes, I always had the vibe that, like, it's offensive when people ask why Goofy talks but Pluto doesn't. I think that would be a fairly frequent question asked by the innocently ignorant, and Goofy would reply reflexively that the answer is he's a native and Pluto is a dog. So saying that Donald is a duck, that Pete is a cat, it's offensive to say so, but when you have to describe a native to someone, what you say is that they have the face of a duck or a cat. Yes, I've stumbled upon the answer. I've always called what kind of animal a native looks like their animal attribute, which is what it's called in Ruby's Faunus. It works for the Faunus because they do indeed have only one small animal attribute. But natives are fully beastly, so that's the solution. A native's animal attribute is called its face. Even though that's not 100% accurate. First of all, they have the entire head of an animal, not just a face, but also a tail, and I think to really get the furry aesthetic down, their hands and feet should also be somewhere between those of a human and those of their face, but I like it. It's very culturally evocative, it sounds inoffensive, it pays tribute to animation history. That's going in the bank. The first stop along the trip is to Lester's Possum Park. Kind of a bit of self-parody on Disney's part. It's very reminiscent of a very low-budget version of a Disney theme park, specifically the Country Bear Jamboree. Costume performers and animatronics. The MC at the Possum Park is a shaky elderly man voiced by Pat Buttram. We've talked about Pat Buttram a few times. This would be the last time his iconic quavery drawl was recorded, as he died a year or so before this film was released. Lester the animatronic possum is voiced by Kevin Lima, the film's director. I mentioned he also worked on The Brave Little Toaster, and what he's best known for, to my knowledge, is directing the film Enchanted, 12 years after this one, in which he also did a bit of voice work. The Possum Park's animatronic concert is extremely low quality, as is. One of Lester's bandmates, Mordecai, is suffering severe electrical issues, and in a pretty brilliant touch, when Mordecai asks Lester a question, Lester replies, "I sure am, Buford." I like that. I see it as a joke about bad continuity in cartoons from the 80s, addressing the wrong character's name. I don't know if anything this severe ever happens to the animatronics at Disney parks. They definitely expend a lot of effort and money to make sure that, as miserable as the place is, it always looks and sounds like Disneyland. It's in peak condition, it runs smoothly. After the, I hesitate to call it a concert, Max gets in an altercation with a costumed Lester performer and ends up so humiliated by Goofy's antics with the real possums they keep at the park that he storms all the way back to the highway and ends up trying to hitchhike out of there, to Goofy's alarm. Father and son have their first full-blown argument of the film and drive to their next destination in tense silence. At a campsite, they set up their tent. Goofy fails to break the tension by inviting Max fishing, and in a bizarre coincidence, they run into Pete and PJ, who, for their part, are camping out in a gigantic high-tech RV, which comes with a bowling alley, basketball court, and giant saw blades that cut down nearby trees so the whole thing can unfold properly. I know it's evil and horrible, but I want one. Even though I'm absolutely petrified of driving a normal car and so couldn't possibly drive an RV. It reminds me of something. What could it be? It'll come to me, or maybe it won't. Either way, note all of the RV's details for some sort of K&K luxury vehicle / siege tank. PJ tells Max that everyone at school is now expecting Max to show up on stage during the Powerline concert, and Max confides in PJ about his lie, as if he needed to. Meanwhile, at the bowling alley, Goofy is wondering if he should give Max his space, but Pete assures him that what he has to do is be strict and firm, to keep Max under your thumb. "A son is like this here bowling ball. If you keep him under your thumb, he won't wind up in the gutter." It's not the exact line, but I like quoting it. It's very Pete. It's a very Pete line. Goofy follows this advice and orders Max to come fishing with him. Goofy introduces Max to the perfect cast, and I love gags like this, like bizarrely specific and lengthy techniques you have to do to accomplish a simple task, and then it really does work perfectly. There's this and the bubble blowing technique from SpongeBob. I gotta keep that in mind. That's a really good joke, and I've only seen it in these two things. Goofy's usage of the perfect cast accidentally snags one of Pete's steaks that he's grilling, and the steak catches the attention of Bigfoot, played by Frank Welker. This movie, when I was very little, I don't think I saw the movie all the way through, but definitely at least this segment of the story may be more, first time I'd ever heard of Bigfoot, and it was definitely quite some time before I realized how weird it is that Bigfoot appears in such a slice-of-life movie like this. But since we got Bigfoot, now's as good a time as any to talk about Yetis. Yeah, in Dungeons & Dragons, especially the Icewind Dale setting, Yetis are often specified as being tundra Yetis. But of course, traditionally, Yetis don't live on tundras, they live in the Himalayas, and then you have their counterpart, the Sasquatch, aka Bigfoot, from the forests of North America, generally considered to be a closely related creature. My idea, ever since I first decided to put Yetis in my own fantasy stories, was that there are three species. The Tundra Yeti, which is kind of your basic one, the Mountain Yeti, a larger and more dangerous variety that lives in mostly unexplored mountain regions, and the Woodland Sasquatch, the smallest of the three and easiest to find. What a lot of fantasy games seem to forget is that Yetis are allegedly, apes. They're just apes. Apes with fully bipedal stances like humans, but otherwise very much like gorillas, I should think. So I don't understand why so many video games I've seen, and some earlier D&D editions, make their Yetis so bear-like, slashing at you with their claws. Apes don't have claws. And in modern D&D, they also have horns. Apes don't have horns, although that does look really fucking cool, actually. I might use that, along with, say, Yetis having a bone-chilling howl. And in every depiction I've seen, Yetis eat meat. Look no further than this movie, where Bigfoot is brought into the story by chasing after a steak. Apes usually don't eat meat, they eat fruit and vegetables. Protein is more of an occasional thing. On the other hand, when humans started eating meat, that protein intake is what allowed our brains to develop to what we've got now, which is, needless to say, kind of valuable. I don't remember, which part of the story bipedalism came in, but, maybe Yetis and Sasquatches are superior to other great apes because they, too, started eating meat. After all, not a lot of fruit and vegetables in the Himalayas. An ape living up there would need to go full carnivore, just like polar bears can't stomach plant matter the way other bears can. So, stuff to think about. Anyway, Bigfoot. He chases Max and Goofy back to their car. Pete cravenly flees in his RV when he sees the woodland ape coming. Once in the safety of their car, Max and Goofy reflect on their luck at actually seeing Bigfoot and capturing him very clearly on video. Unfortunately, Bigfoot starts rifling through their stuff and wrecks the camera right after Goofy has this realization, so fortune and fame in the scientific community is out. The car keys are among the stuff Bigfoot is rifling through, so they're trapped until the Sasquatch loses interest and walks away. Late into the night, they're still trapped. Goofy takes the risk of snatching a nearby can of alphabet soup and heating it up with his car's cigarette lighter so Max doesn't go hungry through the night. The soup gets him reminiscing about how Max used to spell out little words like "Hi, Dad" in his alphabet soup when he was really little. That tender memory creates a bit of awkwardness between the drifting apart father and son. When Bigfoot falls asleep on top of their car, Goofy decides they might as well sleep through the night as well. Before they drift off, Max hands Goofy what remains of the can of soup, with "Hi, Dad" spelled out on the bottom. Aww. Later in the night, Max is kept up by the snoring of both Bigfoot and Goofy and ponders his situation by composing two different postcards to Roxanne, one that maintains the lie, one that comes clean about the truth. Realizing that neither option can end well, he instead retrieves from the glove compartment the map, which Goofy hasn't let him see clearly yet. On a whim, Max erases the lines left on the map by his forefathers and redraws them so the map no longer leads to Lake Destiny, but to Los Angeles. Next, we fade to a diner somewhere later down the road. No scene of them waking up and realizing Bigfoot is gone. I guess I must have imagined it. Well, that's the end of Bigfoot's role in this very grounded, modern-day road trip movie. Max is racked with guilt over his deception with the map, but finds fortune is on his side when, before Goofy ever looks at the changed map, he decides that Max should be put in charge of navigation from now on. We have a montage of them traveling, keeping the car maintained, and enjoying themselves. After jet ski rentals, roller coasters, and monster truck rallies prove not to be to Goofy's taste, Max takes notice and is sensitive enough to take some of his dad's recommendations, like a giant ball of yarn, bat caverns, and a sparsely attended baseball game. They stop for the night at a tacky, nautical-themed roadside motel called the Neptune Inn, with coral dressers, mermaid boob nightlights, and transparent waterbeds with actual fish in them. That last one is a pretty cool-looking idea for about 5 seconds, but I somehow don't think it's ecologically sustainable. Those fish are going to suffocate pretty darn quick. The Peets spot the Goof's car at the inn and decide to check in themselves while they recharge the RV. Pete is noticeably put off and suspicious by how friendly Goofy and Max have become. Later that evening, Pete overhears Max and PJ discussing the alterations made to the map, and he decides to join Goofy in the hot tub to confront him about it. Now, you'll notice in the Goof Troop universe that, not all male characters, quite a good percentage of them, they wear white gloves at all times. This is a remnant of the days before color film. Characters like Goofy, Pete, and Mickey, they were given black fur because that was the best way for them to stand out against the background, and they were given white gloves so that you could see their hands at all times. The same reason they have flesh-toned faces, you see? And in the Goof Troop universe, where you'll notice that Goofy, Pete, and their sons are the only characters with black fur and flesh-toned faces, I guess they kept the gloves around as part of the aesthetic, though the four of them are not the only characters who wear gloves. Bobby wears them and indeed comments on them in the sequel, as do a number of other minor characters, but I don't think any female characters wear them, and I've spotted a handful of males who don't, like Mazer. So clearly it's a style choice, not mandatory, the gloves. I bring it up now because Goofy and Pete are wearing their gloves in the hot tub, and that stands out a bit. Early in the film, I spotted a punk kid who was wearing fingerless gloves over his Disney brand white gloves. If that ain't just silliest thing. Anyway, this is one of the most famously dramatic scenes in the film, and which is, what the film is known for. It's a chance for Goofy to show off the emotional range that Bill Farmer gave him, He never had that when he was played by Pinto Colvig, for sure. And Pete, too, he gets downright scary, Pete is never very frightening as a villain because, they don't try to make him so. They make him a comical villain. But as a father, then Pete is scary. So Goofy explains to Pete that getting close to Max worked best when he took it easy and didn't try too hard, but Pete tells him about Max's deception, lamenting that Max is just a bad kid. Goofy doesn't believe him, so Pete suggests he check the map. Offended, Goofy departs. And here it is. Here's the moment. It's so fucking dark. As Goofy leaves, he says, maybe Max isn't all the things that you think a son should be, but he loves me. And Pete replies, hey, my son respects me. And Goofy very bitterly remarks, yeah, and walks away. God, the chills. A moment like that from Goofy and Pete, it never would have worked if not for the top-notch voice actors that the characters had fairly recently gained. So fucking good. Goofy sits in the car to stew in his anger for a moment, and soon enough, he can't help himself. He furiously checks the map, so ready to see the proof that Pete was lying. We don't see the moment he sees the truth for himself, only a few moments later when he returns to his hotel room, so devastated that he's nearly catatonic. The following day, Goofy is still reeling, and decides to give Max one last chance. They approach a junction. Left to California, right to Idaho. Goofy gives Max the map and asks him which way he has to go. Max is conflicted, but in the end, he chooses left, so close to the juncture that the car scrapes the edges of the highway as Goofy turns in that direction. Goofy is furious, and as soon as he can, he pulls over and storms out of the car, enraged that his son thought him so stupid. Max tries to explain himself, but Goofy doesn't want to hear about it. They stew at each other in silence until the car rolls away. As they try to save it, their anger at each other builds up, and I kind of like this trope, characters discussing their personal issues with one another while they're fighting for their very lives. Bit unrealistic, I'll grant you, but it makes both halves of the scene so much more interesting than the sum of their parts. Especially when the battle has like a metaphor for their issues going on. Soon, the car's fallen into a river, and as they float down, they bicker about Goofy's antics and all the trouble Max has gotten into. And the whole thing softens when Goofy says that he knows Max has a life of his own and wants to live it. He just doesn't want to be left out of it. They drift down a calming river and make amends by singing the film's third and final genuine musical number, Nobody Else But You. The film has 5 songs in it. No, 6. 2 are Powerline songs. 1 is the Lester's Possum Park song. And that leaves only 3 songs to make this an actual musical. And the lyrics to the 3 musical numbers, well, they're incredibly simple and very repetitive, but doubtless effective. They express the emotion. After the song, Max comes clean to everything he's done and why. Goofy concludes that there's only one thing to do. Actually get themselves on stage for the final number of the Powerline concert, as Max promised Roxanne they would be. Before they can work out the logistics, they reach the inevitable waterfall. They only narrowly survive, each saving the other using Goofy's fishing pole. Cartoon physics are heavily at work in, well, most of the action sequences in the film, despite the grounded modern setting. Having lost the car, the map, and most of Goofy's possessions, we somehow find them again at the venue of the Powerline concert, where they smuggle themselves backstage inside instrument cases. And here we get our first good look at Powerline, played by Tevin Campbell. That is to say, Campbell sings both of the Powerline songs on the soundtrack. Powerline doesn't have any dialogue. And the song here at the concert, probably the most famous song in the film, Eye to Eye, spelled with the letter I, the number 2, and the letter I, because pop star. Specifically because Prince. Goofy and Max's plan falls apart a little bit, but Goofy regardless finds himself on stage and performs the perfect cast as if it was a dance. Powerline rolls with it, and soon Max escapes from the security guard pursuing him and joins them. At Stacy's party, we see Roxanne and Stacy trying to replicate the perfect cast, doubtless to become a new dance craze, while Stacy and Bobby have the same meet-cute moment Max and Roxanne did earlier. Despite this, neither Roxanne nor Stacy are anywhere to be found in the sequel. I mean, I get it. Max is several years older in the sequel, and relationships, when you're that young, they seldom last. But considering what he went through to get that relationship, it at least deserves some acknowledgement. And, maybe they couldn't get Kelly Martin back. Roxanne was voiced by Grey DeLisle when she made her appearance in House of Mouse. But Stacy? I mean, they did get Jenna Von Oy back. Jenna Von Oy is in the sequel, so why no walk-on role from Stacy to at least explain where Roxanne went? At least acknowledge that she's still dating Max but went to a different college or some shit, Our next scene begins with Goofy and Max already back in Spoonerville, having apparently somehow recovered Goofy's waterlogged car and driven it all the way back home. They go to Roxanne's house, where Max prepares himself to tell Roxanne the whole truth, regardless of the consequences. He confesses that the moment he and Goofy appeared on stage was, in fact, the moment they met Powerline. And her feelings are that it's truly incredible that a guy she already adored from the moment she heard him laugh went to such lengths just to get her attention. They arrange a date, making it for tomorrow, because tonight, Max has to hang out with his dad. Roxanne moves to shake on it, but he gives her a surprise kiss instead. I don't recommend surprise kisses before the first date. Make your way to when you're having consensual kisses on the regular, and then you can start being spontaneous. The film ends when the car unexpectedly explodes, and Goofy is blown onto Roxanne's front porch, so Max takes the opportunity to introduce them properly. And credits. This is very much a B-team Disney movie, being from the Toon Studio and all, so the only notable name behind the scenes is director Kevin Lima. I see it was his directorial debut after some years in animation and art department, both for Disney and elsewhere, and he did later make his way to the real Disney Studio, first being one of the 2 directors of Tarzan, and indeed, best known for directing Enchanted. And directing Enchanted seems to be his most recent credit, though it seems he has some projects in production as a producer, their release dates still unknown. Let's see, only two other notable things in the credits as far as I can tell. J. Michael Spooner is a background artist. He's the guy at Disney Toon Studios whom Spoonerville is named after. Ain't that neat? Like, naming a town after a background artist. You don't see that very often. Also, actor Curtis Armstrong has an additional writing credit, one of the only writing credits to his name, something I probably wouldn't have seen if I hadn't been looking for it. I knew about it because when Armstrong appears on the sitcom Rules of Engagement, that's a show that aired during its network's off-season and was thus extremely obscure and seldom watched, despite starring Patrick Warburton and David Spade and being on the air for many, many years and being good enough that it always left my grandma and my aunt and uncle in complete stitches. I think they were enjoying it more than was strictly necessary. It wasn't that good, but... Anyway, when Curtis Armstrong appeared on Rules of Engagement, he was playing himself. He'd recently befriended one of the main characters, and he made a point, after David Spade's character could only associate him with Booger from the Revenge of the Nerds movies. Armstrong objects that he has a long and storied history in film, including as an additional material writer on a Goofy movie, which is a really cool, nerdy joke to include from Armstrong's cameo. So I just wonder why that happened. I assumed after I learned that Armstrong was also the voice of the security guard at the Powerline concert, but no, he's not. He doesn't act in this film at all. So yeah, I have to wonder how Curtis Armstrong, of all people, wound up writing additional material for this film. That's such an odd thing. So, a Goofy movie, a genuine classic that just gets better with age. It had a lot going against it, but it's every bit a 90s Disney classic, even if it's not an official part of the Renaissance. Keys and Kingdoms-wise, well, hey, it does have at least one speculative element. Why the fuck is Bigfoot in this movie? And plenty more to work with when it's time to decant this segment into the recap segment a few episodes from now. Let's move on now to 95's entry in the animated canon, Pocahontas. As I alluded last time, the studio thought Pocahontas would get them that Best Picture win, and saw The Lion King as a side project. With the benefit of hindsight, they were certainly dead wrong, weren't they? The Lion King may very well be the best Disney film of all time. It's certainly the place where the Renaissance peaked, while Pocahontas was the beginning of the end. Indeed, the Renaissance films that came after Pocahontas, Hunchback, Hercules, Mulan, and Tarzan, none of those did very well with critics and audiences at the time. They were officially regarded as the downward spiral of the Renaissance era. But these days, ever since the kids who grew up on the Renaissance, grew up all the way, even if The Lion King is indisputably the peak, every film of the Renaissance era is considered to be worthy of the title of Disney classic, except Pocahontas, universally regarded as the Renaissance's lowest point. What a sharp turn in expectations. Unless you count The Rescuers Down Under, that's more the Renaissance film nobody saw than the one nobody likes. Pocahontas is the 7th Disney princess, but most depictions only care about the first 6. Pocahontas is the one who's made the least amount of appearances. While she did get a sequel, she just doesn't appear in a whole lot of princess content unless it's a major crossover event that explicitly includes the entire lineup. In fact, sometimes not even then. I refer to Sophia the First. You see, there's a scene in one episode in which Sophia rides a little boat to the much-hyped secret library, and on her way there she passes through the silent and empty settings of all 11 Disney princess films, oldest to newest, the journey even being punctuated right at the end with a little gust of snowy wind to represent Frozen. It's an incredibly dazzling artistic and atmospheric scene, very quiet and lingering, something you'd never expect to see in a show for such young children, but doubtless it captivates them, and obviously, a set from Pocahontas was included in that montage, but of all the Disney princesses, some of whom Sophia met before this scene and some after, Pocahontas herself remains the only one never to have been summoned by the Amulet of Avalor to give Sophia some advice. And the show's over now, so I guess she never will. There was that time the amulet was on the fritz and accidentally summoned Olaf instead of Anna. Anna never appeared in Sophia either, but remember, Anna never became an official Disney princess. Frozen merch moves just fine on its own, so they didn't bother going through with the plans to incorporate Anna and Elsa into the princess franchise. Basically, Pocahontas' one and only recurrence, apart from, again, her sequel, was the Disney princess scene in Wreck-It Ralph 2, as that one made a point of having all of them. and then some. The fact that Anna, Elsa, and Moana are in that scene means the case can be made for them to be the 12th, 13th, and 14th Disney princesses, but they're still technically not. From a canonical standpoint, there are only 11 Disney princesses, but hey, I'm certainly more than willing to give the other 3 honorable mentions, even if they never get properly inducted. They basically get more FaceTime in it than Pocahontas does. Of course, there hasn't always been a super official lineup of Disney princesses, to my knowledge. Let me look that up. Apparently the franchise started in the year 2000. Okay, I didn't know that. I always thought it started, 93, 94, sometime between Aladdin and Pocahontas, with the original 6. Apparently not. It was a bit later in 2000, and Pocahontas and Mulan were part of the lineup from the very beginning. As was Tinkerbell until 2005-ish, when she was moved to her own Fairies franchise. And then there were official ceremonies to bring in Tiana, Rapunzel, and Merida, and, according to Wikipedia, Moana has been in the lineup since March 2019. They never gave her a ceremony, just quietly started including her in the collection. Well, good to know she's official, at least. She's number 12. I had a point. What was it? I guess the point was that I was under the impression that there wasn't always an official lineup, because I was sure that back when I was younger, I occasionally saw characters such as Alice, Esmeralda, and Megara in the lineup, but maybe I'm wrong. This history of the franchise on Wikipedia makes it seem like the lineup's always been set in stone and that the only former member is Tinkerbell. I don't know, I definitely remember once seeing a Disney princess image in a store or something that included Alice and how she stood out due to being so young. Heck, I don't know. Maybe I'm thinking of the time I learned who the Princesses of Heart are in Kingdom Hearts. They use the original 6, but with Alice instead of Ariel, so as not to break the continuity of Ariel never having met humans before. Anyway, moving on. That, my friends, is why new podcast episodes and retrospectives are so damn long all of a sudden. I really need to stay on topic. We're talking about Pocahontas. We open in England in the year 1607, where a bunch of guys are signing up to sail for the land that will become Virginia when they colonize the fuck out of it. The first character we see is Thomas, played by Christian Bale, bidding farewell to his parents and little sister. Soon he meets up with a couple of recurring muscular tough guys, Ben and Lon, played by Billy Connolly and some other guy. And they're awaiting the arrival of John Smith. Give it up for John Smith, played by Mel Gibson. A mysteriously American-sounding Englishman, an impossibly gorgeous blue-eyed blonde. Here's where the film already starts to run into the problems before we've even met the natives. The real John Smith wasn't all that. Apart from having the most common name in the history of the English language, he was more of a bearded, grizzled outdoorsman, More Grizzly Adams than... I can't even think of a man idealized enough to compare to this motherfucker. Thor, maybe? Like comic book Thor without the beard? The historical John Smith told a lot of tall tales, but despite what rumors said over the centuries, I don't think he ever claimed to have romanced Pocahontas. Why would he have? When they met in 1607, the year this film takes place, she was 11 years old. Finally, in this shipboard scene, we meet our antagonist, John Ratcliffe, played by David Ogden Stiers. Longtime favorite of Disney, it seems. They say Radcliffe was unjustifiably made a villain in this film, that he wasn't really a villain, to which I say, of course he fucking was. He was a colonizer. We don't really get to meet Radcliffe just yet. First, we just come upon our crew mid-voyage and having to battle their way through an ocean storm. Smith does some swashbuckling heroics, ho-hum, and Radcliffe makes a big speech about the prosperity that awaits them in the New World, and before the scene ends, they're chit-chatting about all the Injuns they'll be killing. Charming. Why didn't this film get the 12-second long warning about sucking at depicting cultures? Smith's final note is that he's been to this continent dozens of times and doesn't expect he'll find anything fresh or new at this particular colony. And as our opening credits roll, the British-style march is replaced by some Algonquin chanting, and we meet the natives of Not Yet Virginia in a strangely purple and cliff-covered new world. An Algonquin tribe does their farming and fishing and hunting and some religious ceremonies and stuff, as the chief Powhatan, played by Russell Means, returns from a military campaign of some sort. Is that accurate to call Pocahontas' father Powhatan? Wasn't that the name of the tribe? Maybe that's just the way it works, I don't know. And here we meet Pocahontas herself on a cliff top, an obscenely hot bombshell of a 19-year-old nubile savage. The filmmakers could often be heard defending the decision of how incredibly sexualized she was, calling it relevant to the story, like, sure, pal. All the previous Disney princess types were also supposed to be incredibly beautiful, you know. Pocahontas could just as easily have looked like an indigenous version of them. You didn't have to create a whole nother animation style just to make her stupid hot. There are model sheets out there reminding the animators that, yes, Pocahontas is quite buxom, and don't you forget it. Not sure how real those are, but in addition to, again, actually being a prepubescent child during this film's time frame, the historical Pocahontas was not named Pocahontas. Her name was Matoaka. Pocahontas was just what people called her for being a playful little rascal. That's basically what the name means. Playful one, or little rascal, or wanton troublemaker, something like that. Kind of a creepy thing to call a hot babe like Disney Pocahontas, gotta say. Apparently, you see, when the Europeans first arrived, they introduced Matoaka as Pocahontas due to superstition about not revealing one's true name to strangers. You know, fair enough, that's a thing lots of people believe. Pocahontas is voiced by Irene Bedard, an Alaskan actress of Inuit and Cree descent. Pocahontas' face is modeled after Irene's, which is why her features are so starkly different from the more authentically Algonquin facial designs of her tribe. And in addition to being the only Disney princess who's a fucking F-cup, she's also the only one to have a tattoo, a little ring around one of her upper arms. That's neat. Tattoos are cool. She might not stay that way. Moana doesn't have any tattoos, but they're a massive part of her culture, so I would imagine she's gonna get one, maybe in her TV series. Moana is getting a TV series, yes. A little bit of actual Disney stuff was announced at this big Stockholders' Day thing earlier this month. Hidden among all the excessive amount of Marvel and Star Wars crap, there was some actual Disney in there, including some TV series based on more recent animated canon movies, which is awesome, because, well, I loved most of the TV shows based on Renaissance movies. They are on the list, those TV series. You know, they get their own video series. So it's Moana, and I think it was Zootopia, Princess and the Frog, and Big Hero 6 that were also getting TV shows. Even though Big Hero 6 already had one, guess it's getting another one. We also meet here Pocahontas' animal sidekicks, Miko the raccoon and Flit the hummingbird. First of all, I am crazy about hummingbirds, even more so after realizing how crazy my fiancé is about hummingbirds, so it's always nice to see one. Secondly, the animal sidekicks in this movie, they don't talk. They were going to, but, John Candy was originally cast to play a turkey who was Pocahontas' companion, but remember, this was the film that was going to win that Oscar, so the animal sidekicks can't talk. No, they just have to be as obnoxious as possible and completely ruin the tone of the film. And here's a funny thing. There are 3 animal sidekicks in the film, and they all communicate with animal noises, but they're performed by 3 different voice actors. Flit by Frank Welker, Miko by John Kassir, and Radcliffe's little dog Percy by Danny Mann. It's kind of interesting, you know, they didn't just give the whole thing to Welker. Pocahontas does her iconic dive into the water to meet with her friend Nakama, played by Michelle St. John. It seems, I think every voice actor playing a native in the film is actually Native American. That's a great step forward. At least the speaking voices are. There are 2 singing doubles in the film, and they're both white as far as I can tell, since, as we all know, only white people can sing. There's some exposition about the dreams Pocahontas has been having, which she's sure mean something. A rather common thing to think about dreams to this very day. I remember, as a youth, ascribing a lot of meaning to my dreams. These days, mostly I just dread sleeping because most of my dreams are horrible nightmares. It's always a very good day when I wake from actual pleasant dreams. Which happens more often since I moved here. Maybe it'll get even better as I get better at meditating. But enough about me. Back at the tribe, Powhatan is honoring Kocoum, a fellow who apparently fought very bravely in the campaign they just had. Kocoum is known for being incredibly handsome, but dour and unsmiling, and they hammer this point in every time he's on screen. It feels like his whole thing was written by a child. Like, oh, I can't marry him, he's so serious and no fun at all. Like, fuck you, movie. I'm sorry, that was extreme. Just kind of makes me grumpy of all this film's sins, just the writing of Pocahontas' feelings for Kocoum. It just bugs the crap out of me. It's so childish. Pocahontas and her father do some catching up, and I was briefly thrown off when he takes off his headdress to reveal he has a mohawk underneath it. Indeed, all the men in this tribe have mohawks, and why does that surprise me? The word mohawk derives from an English corruption of the name of the Mohican tribe, which were also Algonquin, so of course the guys in this tribe wear their hair that way. Makes sense. I guess mohawks just have a different association these days, and it threw me off a little bit. It's called Tiffany syndrome, you see. That's where you can't put a certain element, like the name Tiffany, into a fantasy or historical setting because it feels too modern, even if it was totally around in the time and place you're depicting. Powhatan very quickly reveals that he has promised Pocahontas to Kocoum in marriage. At her reluctance, he sings her a short, brief song about having a responsibility to being part of the people, not just the rabid individualist she wants to be. His singing voice is provided by Jim Cummings, and while it's an amazing performance from Jim, it sounds nothing like the character's speaking voice. It's a rather jarring transition. Jim also provides the singing voice of the tribe's shaman Kekata, voiced by Gordon Tutusis. So later on, when they're both singing, Jim doubles up, and it's pretty cool. Like I said, it's a fantastic singing performance, just doesn't quite match the characters. Powhatan's song, it's very, very brief, but it's about following the path of least resistance like water does. That's why rivers live forever. And in the process, he gives Pocahontas her iconic accessory, the blue necklace worn by her mother on their wedding day. I've wondered since I was very young what material that necklace is made of. Maybe the Disney Wiki can tell me. It only describes her necklace as turquoise, which I suppose is a material as well as a color, but I don't know. The necklace doesn't really look like it's made of anything, at least not anything technology could create in 1607, British or Algonquin. Anyway, Pocahontas has her own image song at this point, the I Want song every Disney princess has. Just Around the River Bend, I think is the title. And her perspective is that rivers aren't steady and easy. When you travel down a river, it's completely unpredictable. That's how she wants to live. Order versus chaos, I suppose. Disney princesses do generally prefer chaos because order, in the sense of law and tradition, is not kind to young women. Pocahontas' singing voice is done by Judy Kuhn, and don't know much about her. She's incredibly good. Naturally, Pocahontas is among the most powerful singers in the princess lineup. Judy Kuhn starred in the 1993 Broadway revival of She Loves Me, which is a musical I was in. Also in that production were Brad Kane, the singing voice of Aladdin, and Jonathan Freeman, who plays Jafar, while the 2016 revival starred Zachary Levi, who plays Flynn Rider, and had Peter Bartlett, who plays Lawrence in The Princess and the Frog, in the same small role Freeman played. I liked pointing out to my co-stars that both of the soundtrack album versions we were listening to in rehearsals had a few familiar Disney voices sprinkled throughout. They thought that was pretty cool. It's like I said, you don't really see Broadway stars in other animated films. It's only Disney who seems to get that voice acting is a lot like stage acting. Pocahontas goes to consult one grandmother Willow, who, as we all know, is easily the most historically accurate part of this historical drama. A grandmotherly old spirit living inside a willow tree, voiced by Linda Hunt. Linda Hunt is awesome. She doesn't do nearly enough voice work. She's so good. And I don't think she's Native American, though. I guess all the actors playing Native American humans are. Yeah. Grandmother Willow is a spirit who was also consulted by Pocahontas' late mother, apparently. Her mother comes up a lot, interestingly. She's not like most dead Disney parents who are simply gone. They talk about her mother quite a bit. Pocahontas finally describes this dream of hers. A spinning arrow which stops and points her down an unknown path lined with strange clouds. Grandmother Willow has her little song about listening with your heart. Pocahontas climbs the tree and sees these strange square-shaped clouds from her dream, actually the sails of the British ship. Back on the ship, Ratcliffe discusses plans with his assistant Wiggins, who, like Ratcliffe, is voiced by David Ogden Stiers, so the majority of Stiers' scenes in the film are acting opposite himself. Not a terribly unusual thing in animation, but it's done very well here. While the settlers are here to build themselves some houses and live off some land far from downtown London, Ratcliffe is purely interested in mining for gold, both for his own personal wealth and to gain clout with King James. Smith gathers a party to do some scouting, and Pocahontas spies on them. Smith meets Miko and Flit and feeds them some of his rations from his voyage, but Pocahontas remains concealed. Back at the village, the Algonquins discuss the arrival of the white men. Kakata's divinations reveal the danger they pose, their stripping of the land's resources, their powerful weapons. Kocoum, speaking for the first time, he's played by a very obscure indigenous musician from Chicago by the name of James Fall. He volunteers to repel this invasion, but Powhatan tells him to scout instead. They knew the last guys they fought, similar technology level and tactics, but these strangers pose an unknown threat. Ratcliffe dubs their settlement Jamestown, and the film begins its background running gag of Miko messing with Percy. Most see Miko as the villain in this dynamic. Percy may belong to Ratcliffe and be correspondingly snooty, but he doesn't deserve this torment Miko heaps upon him. Ratcliffe gets the men digging in by far the gayest in a long history of gay-coded villain songs. Don't worry, he gets a vastly superior villain song later on. A portion of the song about Ratcliffe's greed for gold is also sung by Smith, about his lust for adventure and challenge and danger. Mel Gibson does his own singing, but not very much of it. His love ballad with Pocahontas is cut from the original version of the film. Was on the DVD version I used to have, but I don't imagine Disney Plus has it, at least not in the movie. Maybe it's a special feature? I don't look at Disney Plus special features often, probably because there are never very many. A doobly-doo? Nope, not there. It's funny, I can live with Beauty and the Beast without human again. It does flow a little better. I definitely much prefer Lion King without Morning Report, but Pocahontas without If I Ever Knew You definitely seems incomplete, just like the Muppet Christmas Carol without When Love Is Gone. I figure that's what happens when you let the executives cut the songs out of the film. Your movie, it just comes out wrong. Cut songs should be cut because they don't work in the story, not because they bore executives. When executives cut songs, they cut the whole damn movie's important parts, you dig? Anyway, Gibson's singing in this particular song is very impressive. I think this may have been the first time he ever did any professional level singing, and it's quite good. But man, what's the point in making Smith sing if he doesn't get his love ballad later, If you're gonna make the first movie where Mel Gibson sings, why would you make him sing only a little bit? Eventually, Smith finds himself exploring alone, and Pocahontas finally decides to reveal herself to him. He detects her stalking him a few moments earlier and is prepared to shoot his pursuer, but of course he stops because she's a pretty girl. I gotta say, the idea of traveling to a foreign land and meeting a beautiful native princess and falling in love with her, learning how to live like her people do, it's just such a good story idea. It's a shame it's become so tainted by the historical realities of it. All the white savior, mighty white man who's better at being a native than the natives are, and the bold adventurer captain who beds primitive native women at every port. It's all turned so sour like that, as people have realized what was actually going on in the historical events that inspired such romantic stories. Experiencing and adopting someone else's culture should be a really cool, meaningful thing to do. But the entire concept's been ruined. Now white people can't do anything that comes from non-white cultures because it brings back some really bad memories. I'm not lamenting modern political correctness. Never that. Political correctness is just politeness with a few extra syllables. Knowing how to be polite is always going to be a good thing. No, I'm lamenting the history that we as humans have to live with and how it shapes the ugly, ugly world we have today. I lament how unkind the world is. Anyway, Pocahontas and Smith try to communicate. They're the only two human characters who ever actually try to talk with the other group. And in this scene, it's made clear to us that while Smith is speaking English, Pocahontas is speaking Algonquin. At least momentarily. She has one line in Algonquin. Until Grandmother Willow's "Listen with your heart" plays again. And Pocahontas listens with her heart. And apparently that's it. She speaks English for the rest of the film, and we're just made to understand that while we hear the rest of Pocahontas' people speaking in English, they're actually speaking Algonquin, that the natives and the settlers wouldn't understand each other even if they tried talking. If I was telling this story in a Keys and Kingdoms project, specifically an animated or otherwise audiovisual medium, I've never really liked language barriers in fantasy. There's magic like this that allows you to bypass it, and most of the time, like here, when everyone can understand each other, well, the audience understands everyone too. The audience hears English or whatever language the work was made in. And I always figured if I was telling a fantasy story that, invoked some sort of translation magic, that, I would do that. I would do that too. That we'd hear English the whole time. That was before I saw Genlock. In Genlock, everyone uses augmented reality, which mostly means that holograms aren't actually projected, they're purely virtual, but everyone can see them because everyone has augmented reality implants. It also means you can speak any language, and everyone around you will get a subtitled translation. That's most prominently seen in the character of Kazuida, who is voiced by Japanese actor Koichi Yamadera, best known for the lead role in Cowboy Bebop and a whole fuck ton of Disney films dubbed into Japanese. He's played Disney characters as diverse as the Genie, the Beast, Mushu, Stitch, and even freaking Donald. Genlock is Yamadera's first English language project, and yet I don't even know if he, the actor, even speaks English because he doesn't in Genlock. All of Kazu's dialogue is in Japanese. The audience gets subtitles because basically everyone in universe gets subtitles too. And that was just so cool to me. I very much want that to be the way I handle foreign languages in my science fiction and fantasy going forward. If there's a translation technology or magic that allows for the comprehension of languages, or simply a scene where there's no reason for anybody present to be speaking English, I want the audience to hear the language that's actually being spoken. And if technology is involved, well, I'd want there to be brief hesitation on the part of everyone using a translator, because surely such tech could never possibly become advanced enough to operate in real time. Even in Genlock, people interrupt Kazu all the time, or have rapid-fire witty repartee with him, even though, realistically, they should have to take a split second to read the subtitles after the translator software takes a split second to provide them with subtitles. So yeah, were this scene playing out in a Keys and Kingdom story, well, the magic would be more clearly defined, for starters. We've got more of a hard magic system going on here, but Pocahontas and her people would be audibly speaking Algonquin for the entire film. In sci-fi stories, I'd have alien languages, but in fantasy, high fantasy settings where Earth doesn't exist, I would not bother making constructed languages, because why would I? The story is written in English, so if English represents this world's human language, well then I see no reason why the elves shouldn't speak Swedish, or the goblins speak German, or the giants speak Russian, among other examples. Those right there, those are actual examples. And they'll be consistent across all my fantasy stories. I first came up with this scheme for Whirlwind, and I'll be expanding it a bit once it's time to dig deep into dialogue like this. Yeah, totally gonna hire some translators. And yeah, I think Pocahontas, in this hypothetical, would be speaking Algonquin even to Smith, and he speak English back to her just to demonstrate that it's magic. Anyway, back to the movie. Pocahontas and John Smith introduce themselves, and then we go back to the tribesmen spying on the settlers, who are royally fucking shit up, digging holes and cutting trees and redirecting rivers and shit. They're not making a very good impression, and they're not finding any damn gold either. Eventually, the settlers spot the natives and start shooting, and the natives shoot back, if you can call launching arrows from bows shooting or firing. I don't know. I feel like that kind of language was sort of like retroactively applied to archery after guns were invented, but launching, releasing, just doesn't sound impactful enough, while shooting and firing do. I don't know. One native guy gets shot in the leg, and the natives manage to retreat and survive by virtue of the fact that 17th century guns can only get off one shot before you have to reload them. The settlers are on their alert now and fetch their cannons from the ship and get around to building their fortifications. At the village, Powhatan declares that they're going to need backup to fight these advanced intruders. No one is to go near the white men. Pocahontas, of course, misses this announcement completely as she's still off gallivanting with Smith. They talk about saying hello and where they're from, and Miko and Flit hang around with their animation style violently clashing with that of the two humans. And Smith talks about how his people are going to bring civilization to this land. Pocahontas objects that civilization is doing just fine here already, and sings the film's signature number, Colors of the Wind. Meaningless, really. I mean, it makes a pretty good point. The core message about how colonizers are far more ignorant than the people they're allegedly civilizing, who already know how to use and sustain their land properly. As it's been observed, California didn't have wildfires before white folks came along. The natives knew how to tend to that shit. But the overall scope of the lyrics, the Native American spirituality sprinkled throughout it, it's just gibberish. The colors of the wind, the blue corn moon, yeah, not a thing. The lyricist just made those up because they sounded snappy. But snappy it is. Every word of this song has been etched into my heart since I was a teeny tiny tot. Truly gorgeous. I'm gonna listen to it again. How high does the sycamore grow? If you cut it down, then you'll never know. I mean, fucking yeah, am I right? And we're at about the halfway point of the film. The Brits have made some fortifications, mostly a big old fence. Ratcliffe is fretting about how they've failed so miserably at finding any gold, and comes to the somewhat stretchy conclusion that the natives must have attacked them because they were defending their own stockpiles of gold. Wiggins having a rather on-the-nose line about why they probably actually attacked, and starts making plans to get it from the village. Meanwhile, Pocahontas and Nakama are gathering some corn to help feed the reinforcements when they get here. Powhatan sets Kocoum to guard them if they're going to stray far from the village in these troubling times of conflict. Soon, John Smith comes to visit Pocahontas, and Poca goes off with him just as Kocoum shows up. At Pocahontas' insistence, Nakama says nothing to Kocoum. You know, the first K sound in Kocoum's name is a K, but the second one is a C. Also, Nakama is spelled with a K, but Pocahontas with a C. How do they decide that? Who decides it? Kind of a cool thing about English, I guess. No matter what a word sounds like, you can basically spell it however the fuck you want, because every sound has a shitload of ways to spell it. And apparently, if you get a name like Kocoum, or to use a made-up example, Khaleesi, you can spell the same sound 2 different ways in a single fucking word. For no reason. At Grandmother Willow's grove, John discusses gold. Pocahontas looks at the gold coin Smith carries and, unsure of what's valuable about it, tells him there's nothing like that around here. Smith is mildly amused, as he's here purely for the adventure, but he knows that a lot of his guys will be deeply upset. Grandmother Willow reveals herself to Smith and helps conceal Smith and Pocahontas' dalliance from a searching Ben and Lon. There's a great moment where Grandmother Willow lifts up her root, like one root, to trip the pair of them, then makes sure they're watching before she places the root back into the ground. Classic horror movie shit right there that naturally sends them running. Smith follows them back to the camp, but promises to meet Pocahontas again this evening. The reinforcements have arrived at the village, and Pocahontas tries to tell her father that there must be a better way, but to no avail. The war council gathers, and at the settlers' camp they're similarly on their guard. Ratcliffe wants to know where the native village is, and will have none of Smith's claims that there's no gold, and that the natives can help them learn how to live off this land. Ratcliffe declares it treason to speak to the Indians, but Pocahontas and Smith can't help themselves and sneak out of their respective homes later that night to meet up again. Thomas pursues Smith out into the wilderness with Ratcliffe's blessing, and Nakama decides to tell Kocoum about Pocahontas' secret, seeking only to protect her friend. They meet again by Grandmother Willow, who talks about ripples in a pond, how they grow, how the path of least resistance is not always the best path. Smith decides to go along with Pocahontas' plan of going to speak to Powhatan, but unfortunately the two of them decide to kiss passionately before they go, leading Kocoum to burst out of his hiding place with intent to kill Smith, and Thomas to rescue Smith by shooting Kocoum dead, with the shooting technique Smith taught him, no less. As Kocoum dies, he grasps Pocahontas' necklace, which shatters. Other warriors arrive and haul Smith back to the village. It's pretty impactful, you know, the loss of Pocahontas' necklace in this moment. It doesn't really symbolize anything in particular. It's breaking, but, she just looks naked without it. Works for me. And she also looks a bit diminished and vulnerable without it as well. So I think I have to revise what I said earlier, or that is to say, make a little addition. There are moments when settlers and Algonquins speak in each other's presence or to each other, like when Smith comes to pick up Pocahontas in front of Nakama, Pocahontas screaming at Thomas for killing Kocoum, and here Powhatan speaking to Smith and condemning him to death. And the whole time, they never break the role that 2 different languages are being spoken. Pocahontas and Smith can understand each other because of magic, but that's it. No one ever expresses that they can't understand what the other side is saying, but if you're looking for it, this is clearly the case. Anyway, Smith will be executed at dawn, and the settlers, they will attack at dawn, because dawn is when you get executed and when you attack. Universal traditions, it seems. Pocahontas is devastated about what's happened, and Nakama, herself racked with guilt over sending Kocoum to his death, manages to get Pocahontas into the tent where Smith is being held, so they can speak. I hear If I Never Knew You in the background music, but I don't think they're going to sing it. No, they don't. They skip right over it. Pocahontas regrets that the pair of them ever met, but Smith can't bring himself to. He's just so very happy to know what she's taught him and to know her. Thomas returns to the campsite, and there, Radcliffe gets the men ready to go after the savages, singing the film's actual villain song, fittingly enough called Savages. A song in which Radcliffe says such nasty things about Native Americans that the first verse had to be rewritten a bit so it wasn't quite so harsh. I approve of the changes. The song remains nasty. And of course the natives also sing about how the invaders are savages, saying pretty nasty things about the palefaces too. I like this song personally, the bit in both halves of the song in which someone says they're different ergo bad. A little too on the nose, but the rest of it, I just adore the hateful vitriol of it all. It's a great, evil, misguided battle song. But I do understand the problem a lot of people have with the song. Back in the 90s, it was a rather common way of handling conversations about European colonization, e.g., the colonizers were racist invaders, yes, but also the natives were racist too, which falls under the heading of probably true but not the point. Yes, when Europeans arrived in the Americas, the natives told each other stories about pale-skinned demons with pointy heads who ride around on hooved monsters and bear weapons that spit fire. This does not make the two sides equally racist and equally to blame. There's a big difference, that being the natives were just living where they came from. The colonizers were invaders and fucking slaughtered everybody with their superior technology. That the natives fought back, kind of immaterial. I mean, I don't have to tell you that, right? I mean, basically, I'm telling the movie that. Still, kick-ass, sinister song. The Englishman's half of the song gets a really big classical orchestration, while the Algonquin's half employs more horns and woodwinds, and each side has their own percussion to represent the drums of war. And again, in the native half of the song, Jim Cummings is doing the singing voices for both Powhatan and Kakata, always a feast for the ears. Meanwhile, Pocahontas feels like she's lost, like everything she tried to do with Smith was for nothing and only made things worse. Hearing her say that she's lost, Miko brings back the compass he stole from Smith. I like that callback. That's got really great use of Miko right there, actually. Earlier in the film, Smith explains that his compass is to help him find his way when he's lost, shortly before Miko stole it from him. And now, Pocahontas is wailing that she's lost, metaphorically speaking, and Miko takes her seriously and remembers what Smith said, brings her the compass. Gosh, simple yet effective. I'd say Miko's entire presence in the film is worth it just for that moment. And, of course, for the subsequent invention of Waboo. Pocahontas gets a good look at the compass for the first time and realizes it's the spinning arrow from her dream. As it does indeed begin to spin, she regains her confidence and races as fast as she can back to the village as Smith is taken out to be executed and the Englishmen march upon the village. The spirits of the earth and the wind and the animals and her mother seeing to it that she gets there in time is it's very thrilling, what can I say? Plus, highly underrated part 2 of Savages with a whole bunch of layered lyrics, you know, like the settlers and the natives and Pocahontas each have their own vocal line with different lyrics, and they're all played at the same time, and all the lyrics are really stinking good. Is Powhatan about to kill Smith with a club? Gee, hot damn, that can't be a pleasant way to be executed. Fucking beaten to death, jeez. Pocahontas gets there just in time, throwing herself over Smith's body just before her father strikes him. It's just like what Elvis sang about. Correction, that song was originally by one Little Willie John and was made famous by Peggy Lee, with Elvis being just one of many cover versions. Oh, hey, Peggy Lee. I remember her from this very segment. She did the Lady and the Tramp soundtrack. I'm talking about the song Fever, which, among a few other stories about passionate lovers, posits that Captain Smith and Pocahontas had a very mad affair. When her daddy tried to kill him, she said something, "Daddy, don't you dare, we give him a fever." So exactly what we see here. Gosh, if people were singing about that in 1956, I'd wager that legend goes way back. Again, I don't imagine John Smith himself cultivated it. Why would he spread rumors about his wild affair with an 11-year-old girl? Pretty sure that was already uncool back then. At the very least, back then, they abided by "you bleed, you breed," and 11-year-olds, well, didn't back then, as often they do today at the age of 11, because, people were a lot thinner in the past, less hormone-addled. What I'm saying here is that clearly we can't purely blame Disneyfication for the story of this film. Clearly the story's been around for a very long time. Elvis and Peggy Lee and Little Willie John were singing this exact story back in the 50s, so whatever John Smith really did, whatever Pocahontas really did, I imagine it just wasn't as interesting a story as this one. So Pocahontas halts the execution, proclaims her love for Smith, and makes a big speech shaming everyone for coming together to fight each other, though again, one gets the impression that the Englishmen can't actually understand her. They just see a native girl defending Smith, and the chief clearly making a grand declaration of not killing anyone. Smith is released, and both sides lay down their arms. Ratcliffe is enraged and decides to get the fight started himself. He shoots Powhatan, but Smith takes the bullet for the chief. The furious settlers surround Ratcliffe and take him into custody, a moment best known for a really weird animation decision about shadows. As the settlers gang up on Ratcliffe from all directions, all of their shadows are pointing directly at Ratcliffe. It's weird, One might excuse it as rule of cool if these were former evil henchmen here to drag their weakened leader down to hell, but it's not. These are normal dudes relieving their commanding officer of duty. There's really no reason to mess with the laws of physics there. You know what I just noticed on this viewing? Radcliffe's eyes glow red every so often when he's being particularly bloodthirsty. He wishes he was as fabulous as a female gargoyle. See, in the show Gargoyles, the women of the titular species, their eyes glow red when they're agitated. You'll hear more about that in a month or two when I finally start releasing those Gargoyles podcasts I did with Natty literally a year ago now. Still got to finish those Little Mermaid retrospectives, which I'm finally actually working on again. Later, the settlers are getting on their ship. Smith has been patched up as well as they can, but they need to get him back to England for proper medical care. Pocahontas arrives along with a score of her people, offering fresh food for the journey. Thomas explains to Pocahontas why they need to take Smith back to England, but gosh, this film is really good at following its rules about language. If you're watching just casually, you assume Pocahontas absorbs this information, but if you're keeping a keen eye out for signs that one side only speaks English and the other side only speaks Algonquin, Pocahontas gives absolutely no indication that she understands what Thomas just said. Likewise, when Powhatan offers Smith a blanket and his blessing to return whenever he pleases, Smith probably only gets the general idea. Pocahontas and Smith can understand each other, but only each other, not the other's language. Meanwhile, Miko, Flit, and Percy has started hanging out with Miko and Flit at some point, rather than going back with Ratcliffe. In this final scene, Miko has started wearing Percy's ruffled bell collar, and Percy is now wearing a feathered headdress and buckskin. Cultural appropriation. I kid, but anyway, the three animals have repaired Pocahontas' necklace, which is it's nice. Oh, and incidentally, the shot of the broken necklace earlier, it seemed to indicate that the necklace was indeed made of turquoise stones. It's just that when it's whole, they animate it as if it's made of a single ribbon. Go figure. Smith asks Pocahontas to come back to England with him, but she turns him down. She has a people to lead. They smooch really hotly right there in front of her dad, and Smith is taken aboard the ship, and seems a handful of settlers, Thomas included, are staying there. They're not all going back to England. Okay, throwing a bit of realism in there. They're not driving all the pale faces out. Some of them actually want to live there. Pocahontas runs to her favorite cliff top so she can watch the ship sail away for as long as she can, as the wind and all those neon-colored leaves swirl around her. Let's see, what year was this again? 1607? Yeah, nothing bad ever happens to Native Americans again. What? It's a Disney film. Maybe that's true in this universe. And the credits roll over an even cheesier than usual, let me hear you say it, 90s pop ballad version of If I Never Knew You, even though If I Never Knew You wasn't actually in the film. And the important people involved, the directors and the songwriters, I don't know. Apparently that part was in the opening credits, which I didn't read because I was typing. Pretty sure I saw Alan Menken. IMDb. Okay, our directors are Mike Gabriel, longtime animator, his only other directorial credit being Rescuers Down Under, and Eric Goldberg, whom I've actually heard of. He's a very well-known animator, active in the biz since the 70s and still today. Best known, if I had to guess, for being the supervising animator of The Genie. This is his first directorial credit and his only feature directorial credit. After this, he directed some shorts, including 2 segments in Fantasia 2000, and was animation director on some Looney Tunes stuff, including the movie Looney Tunes Back in Action. Never seen that. Wonder if it was any good. Looks like he'll also be the animation director on next year's Space Jam sequel. Kind of interesting. He animates for all sorts of companies. I guess he's a freelancer. Disney doesn't, own his soul or nothing. Who else we got in these credits? Tim Hodge is an animation assistant. Is that the same Tim Hodge I'm thinking of? Son of a gun, it is. Tim Hodge is an animator who's best known for being the voice of Khalil the Caterpillar in VeggieTales. I had no idea he worked at Disney before he moved on to VeggieTales. That's fascinating. And yeah, looks like he quickly gained some prominence there at Big Idea Studios, did some story supervising, some directing, and then he had his big breakout role in the first VeggieTales movie by playing Khalil. And according to his IMDb, looks like he's back to working on VeggieTales now that the series is back in the hands of its creator. That's just nice. This cover of If I Never Knew You became a lot more tolerable when the girl joined in. Just for the record, this guy's a dork. What dorks did they get to sing this one? John Cesada and Shanice. Never heard of them. And then, are you fucking kidding me? The 90s pop ballad ends, and they play another 90s pop ballad. This time, a cover of Colors of the Wind, sung by Vanessa Williams. Holy fucking shit. Two of them. Dude, do you want people to run out of the credits with their ears bleeding? Jesus Christ. I make fun of the 90s pop ballads, but hey, where would the end of a Disney film be without them? Really. Doodly-doo, more credits. They credit the choir who sang in the background. It includes 2 names I recognize. Liz Calloway, whom I talked about in Return of Jafar, and Bobby Page. I'm not sure why I recognize her name, but she's also credited as singing Listen With Your Heart along with Linda Hunt, so she must have been that ethereal solo representing Pocahontas' mother. And they also list a choir of Algonquin singers from the Shawnee Nation United Remnant Band. Neat. They tried, they tried to depict cultures better than they usually do. Weren't quite there yet. Still weren't there yet when they did Hercules or Mulan. Greeks and Chinese really don't like those movies either, but hey, Moana went over pretty well with Polynesian people, and East Asian people are really looking forward to Raya and the Last Dragon, even though that's an Asian-inspired fantasy world a la Avatar The Last Airbender, rather than an actual Asian culture being depicted. So, it's a very well-crafted movie, even if its attempt at indigenousness is pretty insulting. As always, let's conclude with what it can offer to K&K. Well, there's the Native American imagery, and I forgot to write down my thoughts about this point. Okay, I'm going to freestyle it. Okay, so the Native American imagery, I think it's pretty fake as far as this film goes, but we can put some research in, and like Avatar: The Last Airbender, for example, it's 4 cultures. They have a pretty specific aesthetic going on for each culture. Like predominantly the Fire Nation are Japanese, the Earth Kingdom are Chinese, the Airbenders are Tibetan monks, and the Water Tribes are Inuit. But they also include imagery from all sorts of cultures, all sorts of imagery and spirituality. Like there's this one inexplicable Indian guy who teaches Aang about chakras. The Sun Warriors are more Mesoamerican. And just the background is just full of all sorts of authentic stuff from all sorts of cultures, not necessarily used in its authentic manner. So, what I would do, I would put in a shit ton of Native American imagery in the 2 places on Cosmos that are kind of based on three places on Cosmos that are based on, the Americas. And yeah, I just make sure that imagery was used authentically and, where it would have actually been used in these cultures. And, and as for the film's magic, Um, yeah, I mean, the film just has very vague magic around it because Native Americans are magic, I guess, and, we can explain that a little better. I think someone had the idea that, like, Nixie, the country in Cosmos that, most resembles pre-colonial North America, like there was a meteor strike and that taught them the ways of elemental magic and stuff like that. I don't know. And it does bring up, how to deal with first contact between cultures. The world of Cosmos is explored and mapped in the present timeline, but, who says every Cosmos story has to be set in the present timeline, Same year as The Choices is set, we can definitely, explore the history of that world quite a bit. I'm not fond of prequels, but I mean, with so much history, you can definitely have all sorts of unpredictable results. When it comes to first contact, let's hope the people of Cosmos are better at it than humans historically have been. Yeah, humans are still pretty bad at first contact. There are undiscovered tribes in isolated areas all over tropical regions of the world, mostly in the Amazon rainforest, who, remain unidentified because they start launching arrows and spears at anyone who comes near. The most famous such people are the residents of North Sentinel Island off the coast of India. They speak a language unlike any other in the region, suggesting they've been isolated for centuries. Everyone who goes to North Sentinel Island gets killed, so trying to go there is illegal now for the safety of the adventurer. If they want to rebuff the entire world, I suppose they have the right, so... Yeah, I mean, when it comes to a first contact story, you hope to handle such a thing delicately because it's a thing that's gone so horribly for humanity in the past, And now, our third film of the day, the film that launched one of Earth's greatest empires. That's right, people, it's Toy Story, the first movie from Pixar. People always object that Pixar isn't Disney. Yeah, sure it is. It totally is. It may be a different studio, and Disney may not do a whole lot of policing over there, but Pixar has always belonged to Disney. Well, they didn't literally belong to Disney until 2007. They had a contract, you see, and when that contract was up, Disney bought them outright in order to continue the good thing they had going. Because they always had a thing going. All of Pixar's movies before the buyout were distributed by Disney. You remember how they all used to start with this CGI Disney castle with the Randy Newman score playing? Used to, that is. Like a lot of other Disney films, they've retconned out the logo the film used to have and replaced it with the current, overly long Disney Castle logo with the evening star and the train and the fireworks. Anyway, Toy Story, the first feature film ever made entirely with computer-generated 3D animation, and Pixar knew what they were doing there. They made a movie about toys because CGI characters always looked plastic and like they shouldn't be able to move, so they leaned into it. And they knew that being the first CGI feature ever made, the visual effects would become dated as all hell almost instantly. So they didn't once try to dazzle you with visual effects, instead they made sure they had written a damn good story. Toy Story. Apt title. They don't call it Toy Visual Effects Spectacular, they call it Toy Story. We open on the cloud-patterned wallpaper in the bedroom of a young lad by the name of Andy Davis, voiced by child actor John Morris, who hadn't been in much before and hasn't been in anything non-Toy Story related since. Andy is playing with his toys. He's made a whole old western town out of cardboard boxes. He's put his Mr. Potato Head in the role of the story's villain, and in the hero role, his very tall 1950s-era cowboy doll, Sheriff Woody Pride. Though I don't think that surname was ever revealed to the public until sometime between Toy Story 3 and 4. But yeah, Woody's name is Woody Pride. Pretty cool, huh? The Western theme is quickly shattered when Mr. Potato Head defends himself with a force field generating dog, and Woody defeats the force field with a dinosaur. When the story is over, the opening credits roll over Andy just lollygagging around his house while playing with Woody, to the tune of Randy Newman singing You've Got a Friend in Me. There's a lot I could say about Randy Newman, and I'll probably say a lot of it next week, as he also did the music for James and the Giant Peach. Suffice it to say, all his scores and songs sound the same, his voice is that of an annoying cartoon doofus, and is not fit to be singing powerful songs, and he's a terrible, terrible lyricist, but somehow, throughout all 4 Toy Story movies, he makes it work. The quality of the Toy Story franchise elevates Randy Newman to a point where he is not the bizarre mediocrity that somehow made it big that he usually is. And hey, while pausing the movie to type that, I noticed this lamp in the background, a lamp with a pastoral theme. This must be the lamp that Bo Peep is part of. People talk about how she's technically not a toy. She's a little figurine that comes with a lamp, and I've always been like, where does that come from? I've seen the original trilogy so many times and never once seen her with a lamp. But hey, there it is. Though as to finishing the film, I still haven't seen her with it. So the story was written by basically Pixar's original power quartet: John Lasseter, Pete Docter, Andrew Stanton, and the late Joe Ranft. I think there was a fifth guy. The original teaser trailer for WALL-E sees Stanton talking about a meeting that they had after Toy Story wrapped where they conceived their next 3 properties: A Bug's Life, Monsters, Inc., and Finding Nemo, plus WALL-E, which they wouldn't actually make until much later. I'm going to assume the fifth guy was Lee Unkrich, I would imagine, or maybe Bob Peterson. I don't feel like finding out. Lasseter directs, and the screenplay is written by Stanton. The writing duo of Joel Cohen and Alex Sokolov, best known for writing the Garfield movies and a few other not very good comedies. Not sure what they're doing here. And of all people, Joss Whedon. I've never heard him talk about the fact that he helped write Toy Story. I'd sure like to know how he got that gig and what he thinks of it and why he hasn't worked with Pixar since then, you know? He's an amazing storyteller. One would think he'd want to continue working with the most daring and innovative storytellers in the history of Hollywood. Andy sets Woody back in his bedroom so he can go prepare for his birthday party. They're having it 1 week early since the family is moving to a new house soon. Said family consisting of Andy, his unnamed mom, voiced by Laurie Metcalf, and his infant sister Molly. No dad ever mentioned at any point. Once the toys are alone in the room, Woody comes to life and lets his fellow toys know that they're free to do the same. And that's all you need to know about the Toy Story universe. It's like reality, except that toys, and all things that are in any way like toys, come to life when humans aren't looking. There's no explanation for this. It's not until the end of Toy Story 4 that anyone even asks for an explanation, and they don't get one. But despite this magical phenomenon not being explained, they sure as fuck dissect it across all 4 films. They talk a whole lot about being a toy and what it's like, and it's loaded with all sorts of metaphors about growing old, watching your children grow old, dying, losing loved ones, becoming obsolete in a society you're too old for. It's powerful stuff, but I'm getting ahead of myself. When it comes to Keys and Kingdoms, well, I went in knowing that Pixar films couldn't offer me very much. The premises of Pixar films are so unique, so not worthy of examining and putting into a hard magic system, because Pixar just doesn't do hard magic. As a rule, their speculative premises are completely inexplicable. They're childish ideas that run on childish logic, because the movies are never about exploring the logic of what makes their worlds work. The movies are about how it makes the characters in those situations feel. And feel they do. That's what Pixar stories are about, not worlds and how they work. That material is reserved for jokes. What the stories are about are characters and their feelings. So, if Pixar is going to teach me anything about Keys and Kingdoms, it's how to tell stories that make grown adults bawl like fucking babies, you better believe it. There's this long-running joke about Pixar and how it's all about feelings. The idea is that every few years, Pixar asks themselves, what if X had feelings? What if toys had feelings? What if bugs had feelings? What if monsters had feelings? What if fish had feelings? What if cars had feelings? The joke doesn't entirely work if you list all their films in order. It's like, what if superheroes had feelings? That doesn't really fit into the joke very well, because lots of movies are about superheroes with feelings. The climax of the joke used to be, what if feelings had feelings? Referring, of course, to Inside Out, but as of this year, the punchline is now, what if black people had feelings? Which is a pretty good new punchline, I gotta say. Good joke, good little commentary on how freaking long it can take to get to halfway decent representation sometimes. So yeah, while virtually none of the premises of Pixar's films can ever possibly be true in the Keys and Kingdoms universe, they do at least need to be alluded to. Oh yeah, they're like, have some living toys in the Keys and Kingdoms universe somewhere, maybe for a function, like when I talked about the plushie constructs based on Winnie the Pooh characters. It could be something like that. Back to the movie, Woody, of course, is played by Tom Hanks. They made the decision to give Woody a voice and mannerisms that aren't the slightest bit cowboy-like. But I guess that works in their favor because he's a protagonist who gets put through the ringer over the course of the series, and that would probably be difficult to take seriously if Hanks played those moments with a wholesome 50s Western drawl. Now, this was 1995. In 93, Tom Hanks starred in the gritty AIDS-related drama Philadelphia, and in 94, the simple and wholesome American epic Forrest Gump, winning Oscars for both and becoming thereafter a legendary dramatic actor known for playing the everyman who faces strong adversity. Before that, he was a comedian, and given how long it takes for an animated film to be made, and this being the first feature film made in this particular medium, I would hazard a guess that Hanks was still a comedian when they cast him. The change in his career trajectory by the time the film came out really worked in his favor because while this first film is largely a lighthearted comedy with just the amount of drama it needs to be, a movie, the subsequent 3 films in the series are ultimately absolutely heart-wrenching explorations of incredibly deep themes, and well, you'd pretty much need a guy who's won 2 consecutive Oscars to bring such moments to animation. So, Andy's room buzzes to life. Andy's room here in the first 2 movies, and of course, other locations throughout all the movies, are absolutely loaded with all sorts of toys, and it just makes you nostalgic for childhood. Just this huge variety of toys they have around. And what's especially great about the fact that, Pixar had Disney behind them in making the Toy Story films is that it allows them to license a few real-ass name-brand toys to serve as characters. And it just adds a layer of authenticity to the whole franchise. And even more remarkably, 2 of these name-brand characters are among the most prominent characters in the whole trilogy. The rights holders let them use these real toys as major characters, namely Mr. Potato Head and the Slinky Dog. Both are redesigned from their real-life version to serve as more appealing characters. Mr. Potato Head, for example, actually has 2 eyes and 2 shoes in Toy Story, whereas the real Mr. Potato Head just has 1 peg where you stick a pair of eyes and 1 where you stick a pair of shoes. This change, along with a few other intangible tweaks, just like I said, it makes him a much more expressive character. In fact, I'm surprised that Playskool has never actually redesigned Mr. Potato Head to be closer to the one from Toy Story. You can't turn a real Mr. Potato Head into One-Eyed Bart. As for the Slinky Dog, well, the Toy Story version looks absolutely nothing like the real deal. They basically gave free rein to Pixar's legendary character designer, the late, great Bud Luckey, to design an appealing-looking dog with a slinky in it, a vast improvement over the real toy designed by whatever company makes slinkies. Bud Luckey, veteran animator of many decades, best known for his segments on early Sesame Street. He switched over to computer animation on, a whim, I guess, and thanks to encouragement from his awestruck fellow staff members at Pixar, he has a pretty good resume in film as a musician and voice actor. Most prominently, he's the guy who designed Woody. Though Luckey himself he would modestly clarify that he designed several dozen cowboy characters and Lasseter just picked the right one, but did he ever? Woody's character design is absolutely brilliant. I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, but Woody is one of the only CGI characters in history who, in my opinion, doesn't look absolutely hideous. Presumably that's just me. Most people don't seem to have a problem with CGI character designs in general, but I have never liked the character design in that industry as a whole. For years now, people have complained about same-face syndrome, that being that most women in Disney and Pixar films all have the exact same facial features, and I'm like, yeah, of course they do. They finally found a face design that was actually attractive. Keep using it. Find a good design for a man's face while you're at it, and you'll be all good. Quit experimenting. They keep thinking the answer is to make their CGI characters more and more cartoony and stylized, and it's just, no, you're making it worse. Go back to only slightly caricatured. You almost had it. So the most prominent toys in the room, I've already mentioned Mr. Potato Head and Slinky Dog, both played by legendary comedians with careers spanning back decades. Don Rickles and Jim Varney, both now deceased. Their quartet of funny sidekicks is completed by Rex the Dinosaur, played by Wallace Shawn. Hey, he's been in 2 movies this week. And Ham the Piggy Bank, played by John Ratzenberger. All 4 actors bring a ton of themselves into the roles, now I think about it. Rickles portraying Potato Head as an extremely aggressive and belligerent, throwing around colorful insults kind of guy. Varney playing Slinky as a country-fried good old boy. Shawn playing Rex as neurotic and meek, and Ratzenberger playing Ham as an insufferable know-it-all. Ratzenberger, of course, is best known for the fact that he's in every Pixar film. Even if his only line is gracias, they manage to squeeze him into every one of their stories. Apparently, he's also in Soul. It's interesting, the newest Pixar film, Soul, came out less than a week ago, and for the first time ever, John Ratzenberger was not in the credits. Director Pete Docter had to come forth and confirm that he's even in the film at all, but for the first time ever, as of this recording, nobody knows where. Not only is he not in the credits, bizarrely not even in the additional voices section, where he's never been relegated to before, but you'd think if his role was a secret, they'd just put him there. Clearly he's not doing his usual honky, nasal, piggy voice that he puts on for the majority of his Pixar roles. Darndest thing. I wonder when that mystery will be solved. So they get ready for a staff meeting. Now, the animation in this film, like I said, they weren't trying to dazzle anybody. They knew they'd be better off doing that with the writing. The sets have all this intangible quality of emptiness, airlessness. The movements are very stiff and jerky. Mouth movements especially look very unnatural. And the human characters stay off-screen as much as they can possibly get away with because they look far too much like they're also toys. I will say, though, that the art of CGI animation, it has not evolved so much that anybody can make a film that looks like Toy Story. You still need quite a bit of budget and experience just to get onto Toy Story's level. It's leagues better than what a rank amateur can pull off, even today. Which I guess is a comforting thing about technological growth, that, you do still need to try. As for Pixar themselves, well, it didn't take them long to get onto the level they're known for now, Their second film, A Bug's Life, eliminated virtually all the flaws in Toy Story's visuals I just talked about, and they very quickly injected their newly flawless visuals back into the Toy Story universe by making their third film, Toy Story 2. Leagues better. And by comparison, Toy Story 3 doesn't look that much better than Toy Story 2, It doesn't have to. They pretty much had it down, 11 years later, not much they had to change. Basically, the only upgrades the third and fourth films could make came from new characters. Like 3 and 4 included plush characters, fuzzy stuffed animals that they probably couldn't have made look huggable and fluffy enough in the first two films. And of course, Toy Story 4 included a cat that looks like it came from a completely different universe than the dog here in Toy Story 1. And the humans in 3 look a lot better than they did in 2. They hadn't quite perfected humans by Toy Story 2, but in 3 and 4, yeah, they nailed it. I really like the human designs in Toy Story 3. Those are good human designs in CGI. Why can't they all look like the people in Toy Story? But yeah, most of the improvements to rendering technology that Pixar could possibly make, well, they basically made all of those by Toy Story 2. With Monsters, Inc., they learned how to do fur. With Finding Nemo, they figured out water. With The Incredibles, they perfected hair and fabric. And then, like Alexander the Great, they wept for there were no worlds left to conquer. I guess that'll be why they started to do movies set inside the mind and the afterlife. They had to invent entirely new dimensions beyond human understanding just so they could come up with new things for them to invent ways to animate. Pretty soon, they will be able to render magic itself, and at last, humanity will know the heartbreaking beauty of a unicorn and the mind-bending horror of Cthulhu. Thanks to Pixar. Once again, I've been talking a fuck ton, considering I'm only 5.5 minutes into the movie. It doesn't bother me this time, bitches. I'm talking about Pixar. There's a handful of other notable toys in the room, including those you wouldn't expect to see standing up and walking around, like the Etch-a-Sketch, the See and Say, and Pixar's own off-brand Speak and Spell called Mr. Spell, played by animator Jeff Pigeon. But a lot of them are a lot smaller than our main characters, and a lot of them talk very little, if at all. It's mostly Woody and the four guys, and lest we forget Bo Peep, played by Annie Potts. As mentioned, she's not a toy per se. She's a little porcelain doll that comes with the desk lamp on Molly's dresser. And she's Woody's love interest. She's very flirty and sexy with him, and he doesn't really put much effort into flirting back. He just acts like he's crazy lucky to have her affections. They don't really dig into the fact that Woody is in love until Toy Story 4. At the staff meeting, for starters, I would be remiss, I'd be bad at being a Pixar fan, if I didn't point out that several of the books on the shelf behind Woody in this scene have the titles of short films that Pixar had made earlier, namely Red's Dream, Knick-Knack, and Tin Toy, the last of which also says on its spine that it's authored by Lasseter. Pixar short films, I'll be getting into those later. I'm going to do a whole episode dedicated to animated shorts from Pixar and Disney after I'm done with the original collection. Woody makes sure everyone has a moving buddy. Don't want any toys getting lost during the move, after all, and and he reports that the birthday party has been moved up a week, which alarms everybody. Birthdays and Christmases mean new toys, and new toys means Andy might get rid of some of his old toys. Woody tries unsuccessfully to calm everybody down as birthday guests start to arrive. To calm everyone's nerves so they at least know what they're up against, Woody sends the Bucket-O soldiers downstairs to spy on the birthday party. I don't know if Bucket-O soldiers is a real brand name, but these tiny green plastic army men, those were certainly a real thing from the childhoods of many people who watched this film. I had some myself as a tot, though mine came in a lot of colors, not just green, and they were Western-themed, not soldiers. Their leader is Sarge, played, because of course he is, by the late R. Lee Ermey, a real-life Army drill sergeant who became an actor who plays Army drill sergeants when he was consulting for Stanley Kubrick on Full Metal Jacket, and Kubrick decided to put him and his drill sergeant routine into the film. Pretty kick-ass story right there. So, the army men bring out half a baby monitor and make their way downstairs, and it's super epic because they're so tiny. Just going downstairs, real big mission for them. It's an unspoken but very obvious rule in the Toy Story universe that toys cannot let humans see them moving, not even if it costs them their own lives. So it's a stealth mission for sure, and it's awesome. The toys, continuing to avoid detection, starts to strain suspension of disbelief more and more as the series goes on, but yeah, it's introduced us brilliantly here by these tiny green army men using their parachutes and a jump rope and stuff like that. Stories about, the first time this scene was ever shown to an audience, well, the stories go two different ways. Some say that the filmmakers were trying to make the scene epic, but test audiences always laughed. Others say they were trying to be funny, but the test audiences thought it was gripping and exciting. I don't really care which of these stories is true. Clearly, the scene is both. So the army men hide in a potted plant and spy on Andy opening his presents, reporting it back to Woody and the others back in the bedroom via the baby monitor. Probably the most amusing part of this whole scene is the fact that Sarge looks through his binoculars, and even though they're made of solid green plastic, he can totally see through them because, well, why shouldn't he? His eyeballs are solid green plastic, too. Ooh, the Luxo ball bounces by. The big yellow rubber ball with a blue stripe and red stars on it originated in Pixar's very first short film, Luxo Jr., and it appears in Pixar films all the damn time. It's not a hard and fast rule like John Ratzenberger or the Pizza Planet truck, but it certainly shows up a lot. He even had a mini-game based around it in the Finding Nemo video game. As the day drags on, it seems Andy's getting some pretty lame shit. A lunchbox, bed sheets, nothing worth replacing toys with. But it seems maybe all this was a decoy, a ploy on the part of Andy's mom to put him off his guard for a surprise, last-minute present. In the chaos, the soldiers are unable to report the identity of the new toy and only barely get to warn the other toys that Andy and his friends are coming upstairs. Andy carelessly sweeps Woody off the bed and replaces him with his new gift before he and the guests head back downstairs for games and desserts. Nervously, Woody checks the bed for the new arrival, and lo and behold, it's an impossibly cool Buzz Lightyear action figure. And I do mean impossibly cool. The karate chop button and the retractable wings, literally impossible for both of those to exist on one toy. Their mechanics, as presented in the film, they're mutually exclusive. Mutate, no problem. The karate chop button is easily the least cool aspect of the toy. If he has everything else, you're good to go. Buzz awakens. He is, of course, voiced by Tim Allen, and as he comes to life for apparently the first time ever, something seems off about him. He tries to contact Star Command, he makes captain's log entries in his wrist communicator, and he thinks his packaging, opened and carelessly tossed onto the bed, is his spaceship crashed and in need of repairs. As we see in Toy Story 2 from one other toy in the Buzz Lightyear franchise, and which the series creators have confirmed, for some mysterious reason, science fiction-themed toys are unique in that they start life completely unaware that they're toys, no matter how little sense that makes. I hope you couldn't hear that car alarm. The main characters being named Woody and Buzz suggests to me that Pixar originally set out to make a movie about sex toys, and then they gave their treatment to Disney, who were like, "We thought you meant regular toys." Classic joke right there. Speaking of our two leads, Pixar originally wanted Paul Newman to play Woody and Jim Carrey to play Buzz, but it seems that was dreaming a little too big for their first film. Even with Disney backing them, they couldn't swing it. They also approached Billy Crystal to play Buzz, and he turned them down, but called them up later and said he immensely regretted not getting to play Buzz once he saw the movie. It wasn't long after that before he got cast in a Pixar role that suits him much better, that of Mike Wazowski, and later on, Pixar would also get that chance they wanted to work with Paul Newman. Jim Carrey hasn't been in a Pixar film to date, but I have no doubt they could get him easily if they asked. They still did pretty good. They got Tom Hanks, not a bad guy to get on your payroll even at the time. But a huge freaking deal by the time the movie came out. And now an absolute legend. They got real lucky there that they get Tom freaking Hanks to keep coming back for their movies. And Tim Allen, he was certainly relevant at the time. Less so by the time Toy Story 3 came out, but still very good at playing Buzz Lightyear at least. Jim Carrey or Billy Crystal wouldn't have worked at all as this character. Tim Allen has this deep, authoritative voice that really makes him feel like a space captain. I really don't know why they thought that casting a super goofy and silly comedian was the way to go, and Buzz's whole deal is that he takes himself super seriously as a Starship Ranger. They needed someone really dry and witty like Allen. And conversely, Paul Newman is too serious to have worked as Woody. They needed Tim Allen's dryness and Hanks's comedy. And they also needed both actors' incredible gravitas once the series turned into a story about existential angst. It's a truly fabulous casting, and that's Pixar for you. They cast big actors to do voice work. Yes, generally an unpopular thing to do, but those actors are just so perfectly cast that they completely disappear into the roles. No matter who they cast, no matter how distinctive a celebrity they are, you always end up surprised when you realize who voiced them. Not me, because I always look up the cast ahead of time because I'm a dork, but the people watching with me, whenever we're watching a Pixar film, they never once ask me who's playing a role like they do with most animation. And when the credits come up, it's just shock after shock. It kind of just hit me. I watched Soul the other day it came out, and not once did I hear Jamie Foxx and Tina Fey. They just melted right into their characters. I only heard Joe Gardner and Soul number 22. Woody introduces himself to Buzz. Pretty good reflections in Buzz's helmet. They probably didn't have to do that. No one would have known at the time that you're supposed to see that in CGI animation, but they went and did it. So Buzz shows off his features to Andy's other toys. Buzz, of course, thinks this is all real Space Ranger equipment, though one has to wonder what he thinks the multiple buttons that just play clips of his own voice are for. But even though it's not real, the fact remains that what he is a very, very cool action figure with all sorts of features, leaving Woody, nothing but an extremely outdated pull-string voice box, immediately feeling inadequate. I don't know if action figure is the right word. When I think action figure, I think a rather small, posable toy like a He-Man or a G.I. Joe. Buzz is way bigger than those. He's more like the size of a doll, but of course they invented the term action figure as an alternative to the word doll to get boys to play with them, so I guess if the definition of action figure is just a doll for boys, then yeah, Buzz is totally an action figure. Gosh, it really just seemed like just a fucking soulless corporate manipulative term when you really think about it, doesn't it? Action figure. The term implies a certain level of craftsmanship and posability and customizability. Basically, it implies a really cool toy, but strip away what advertisements have been telling you about the term all your life, and you realize, fucking course, action figure is just a term invented by big toy companies, so boys don't get embarrassed about playing with human-shaped toys for fear that someone will call it a doll. Christ. Corporate manipulation and toxic masculinity. Action figure, my ass. So, Buzz's features, making a little list here. He's got the little panels that open. And there's little stickers underneath, stickers that depict all the spacesuit equipment. He's got those 3 oblong buttons. I guess each one plays a different voice phrase. The helmet comes on and off. I think it's the big red button that unleashes his wings, right? That's right. And the wings have blinky lights, one green and one red. There's the laser, of course, and the karate chop button. I think that's everything. Still, that's a lot to pack onto one toy. Pixar really did their job well in designing the coolest toy ever, to the point that he, in fact, has too much stuff to actually put on a single toy. It's not physically possible to produce a real Buzz Lightyear toy that's exactly like the film, so Again, I think it's easy enough as just getting rid of the karate chop button. Listing everything he has for future use. This is the Keys and Kingdom segment, and if you want to build Buzz Lightyear in the game, you gotta have all the stuff. Now, Woody gets a little annoyed that everyone is treating Buzz like he's a real space ranger, and Buzz seeks to prove that he is exactly that by flying around the room. He gets incredibly lucky and manages to bounce around the room harmlessly enough that, for now, his delusion is unbroken. Woody says that, if anything, that was falling with style. Oh, and he also calls Buzz Light Beer, which is funny. It's a running gag that he keeps getting Buzz's name wrong, calling him Lightweight and Light Snack. I think they front-loaded the joke, though. Light Beer is clearly the best iteration of that joke. They shouldn't have opened with it. To the sounds of the song Strange Things, we see that over the course of the next week or so, Buzz starts to take over Andy's life, and Woody often finds himself alone, not helped by the fact that his fellow toys are not challenging Buzz's delusions in the slightest, helping him exercise and repair his spaceship in their downtime. As the song ends, Andy is putting away his toys and, taking a moment to decide between Woody and Buzz, decides he's going to sleep with Buzz and put Woody in the toy chest, probably for the first time ever. Ooh, I forgot about another feature of Buzz. He glows in the dark. That's mentioned once here in the first film, but not conveyed very well. I guess they just didn't have the lighting engine for it. You can't really tell Buzz is supposed to be glowing green in scenes set in the dark, unless you're looking for it. Naturally, this gets just so much better in later films. So much better. Next morning, there's that classic gag where the rubber shark does a Woody impression, and Buzz reveals to Rex and Slinky that he now has Andy's name written on the bottom of his boot. Glumly, Woody checks the inscription on his own boot. It's very faded, and the N is backward, while Buzz's looks much fresher and written in a steadier hand. Damn, that Pixarian attention to detail, you've gotta love it, and we could all learn from it, I'm sure. Finally, Woody decides to confront Buzz, first to stop encroaching on his turf, and second to quit acting like a real spaceman. Only during this confrontation and the classic Buzz's helmet comes off bit does Woody finally realize that Buzz actually believes he's Buzz Lightyear, not merely an action figure of Buzz Lightyear. And here we're introduced, purely so we know what's going on when he shows up later, introduced to Sid Phillips, Andy's neighbor, freshly returned from summer camp. And to get a good look at what Sid is doing, Woody looks through Lenny, an absolutely adorable pair of tiny binoculars with little legs, voiced by Joe Ranft. Very cute character. Sid, I'd say slightly older than Andy, and he has a rather different method of playing with toys. He dismembers them, crushes them, blows them up with the explosive, which his negligent parents let him buy. The guys at Pixar say that they can't really see Sid as the villain because that's how they used to play with toys. Someone should check if all the guys at Pixar are serial killers, because that's messed up. Who the fuck does that? Normal kids keep their toys in pristine condition. The toys are unsettled at having to see Sid again, but they know they're moving soon, and he won't be their problem anymore, because that's how foreshadowing works. A week or so has gone by, perhaps by now it's Andy's real birthday, because his mom offers to take him to Pizza Planet. Overhearing Mom say that Andy can bring one toy with him, Woody is determined to be that one toy this time. He hijacks RC, Andy's remote-controlled car, and runs down Buzz with the intent of knocking him behind the desk so Andy can't find him. Goes a bit further than Woody intended, and Buzz ends up being knocked clear out the second-story window, making a Wilhelm scream as he does so. Ah! RC fingers Woody for the crime, and he's unable to convince anyone that it was an accident. Now, this moment is a good time to mention certain infamous early versions of the movie that never made it past the storyboards because animation is really frickin' hard, so nothing gets past storyboards unless you're 115% sure it is going to end up in the final cut of the movie. So in one all-storyboard version of the movie, Woody was a tyrant who often threatened his fellow toys with being shipped off to Goodwill or whatever, and was especially abusive to his meek and nervous second-in-command Slinky. So when Woody accidentally knocks Buzz out the window in this version, the rest of the toys are all too happy to get violent revenge on Woody by throwing him out the window too. This version of Woody's personality, it derives from notes Pixar got from Disney about the version before that. Disney suggested that they make the movie more adult, more edgy, and to make Woody comically unsympathetic. The guys at Pixar, they did what most writers would absolutely never do, and they did exactly what the producers told them. What did they know, after all? They never set out to be storytellers. They were programmers / animators, just working on this weird new art form where you do both at once. And so this new version of the movie was completed in animatic form, and Disney were absolutely appalled to realize that Pixar had done exactly what they suggested and made the movie absolutely horrendous in the process. Ever since then, Disney doesn't give Pixar no notes no more. They cracked the code right there at the beginning of their relationship that Pixar is much better at telling stories than they are. Pixar has absolute auteur license to do whatever the fuck they want. Pixar makes the movies they want to make how they want them made. A lot of people think Pixar makes sequels due to mandates from the executives at Disney. No way, dude. For one thing, after Disney bought Pixar, most of the higher-ups at Pixar were made into executives at Disney, so they can't pressure themselves into making questionable creative decisions. Nah, man, Pixar makes sequels when they're good and ready. Why do you think Pixar sequels never come out less than a decade after the previous one? It's because they wait for inspiration to strike. They keep making Cars films because John Lasseter, despite his otherwise impeccable taste in art and animation, really likes Cars. It's his pet project. The fact that it makes millions for Disney in merchandising just means Disney aren't about to stop them from making more crummy vehicle movies. Treading hot water there, like somewhere between 2/3 and all of the people who listen to this podcast are massive Cars fans, so yeah, that remark's gonna get me an earful. Anyway, yeah, Pixar are awesome, and they have all the power in the Disney-Pixar relationship. It's a beautiful thing, really. So as the other toys start to turn against Woody, well, Andy turns up, and they don't have a chance. So, unable to find Buzz, Andy grabs Woody instead. Buzz comes to consciousness in the hedges outside Andy's house and hops atop the car to follow Woody. On the way to Pizza Planet, they stop at a Dynaco gas station. I remember as a kid, I realized what was going on there. They were spoofing both the Conoco and Sinclair gas stations with the Conoco name but the Sinclair logo. It's cool when you're a kid and you pick up on a reference like that. Dynaco, of course, would come back later, prominently, in the first Cars film, but now be associated with a lovely shade of Richard Petty blue and a T-Rex instead of the Sinclair sauropod. So for a brief moment, Woody and Buzz are alone in the Davis family van. Woody is relieved to see Buzz alive, but Buzz is more interested in a violent revenge. They fight each other through and under the car. The series has always had really fun fight scenes. I think I replicated that pretty well in a big Toy Story fanfic I wrote a few years back. Guess we'll find out when we reach that point of the fanfiction segment here on the podcast. The Davises drive away, leaving Woody and Buzz stranded at the gas station. Woody immediately starts weeping about being a lost toy, a term that would be explored more in Toy Story 4, though I suppose it's not so much a term as it describes, a toy who's lost, but when you're a kid, or a toy, the concept has a lot of gravity. Woody and Buzz get in a big argument about their predicament, Buzz having a long monologue about his big space mission being in jeopardy that leads to Woody's famous, "You are a toy!" rant. But they're saved when a Pizza Planet delivery truck stops to ask for directions. Woody figures it'll head back to the restaurant once it makes its delivery, and they can reconnect with Andy that way. And Woody knows the other toys will kill him if he returns home without Buzz, so he persuades the Space Ranger to come along by bluffing that Pizza Planet will have other spaceships he can use to return to Star Command. The Pizza Planet truck is, of course, iconic. It's an old yellow Toyota from the late 70s, very dinged up and dirty, so scratched that its back bumper just says Yo instead of Toyota. Apparently Toyota was not amused, and the truck had to be rechristened as a fictional Gyoza brand truck. But hey, you know what they say? A Toyota's a Toyota. That's a palindrome. Anyway, the Pizza Planet truck is Pixar's other lucky charm. Apart from Ratzenberger, they feature it in all their films. I couldn't tell you exactly where. I used to be able to, but they have a lot more films now than they used to, and I'm not the sponge for cool film trivia. I was before puberty, chronic depression, and self-harm wiped out a shitload of my brain cells. I can tell you that the truck is not in the first Incredibles film, and nobody can really be sure why. I mean, it takes upwards of 3-4 years to make an animated film. You don't just forget to stick your company's lucky charm in the film somewhere, and I can tell you that yes, they did manage to stick a 1970-something Toyota something, even in 12th century Scotland and in a pastoral dinosaur society. They're just that cool, that's how. And I just noticed for the very first time that the truck has a bumper sticker. It says, "How is my driving?" And then below that, instead of a number you can call to report the driver for reckless driving, it just says, "Ha ha ha ha." That's fucking funny. I love it. They go to Pizza Planet, which is a pizza joint slash animatronic arcade, in the same vein as Chuck E. Cheese and the like, except of course it has a strong space travel theme and, by all appearances, doesn't suck. It's clean and the games aren't shitty and lame, and as we'll soon see, the claw machine isn't completely rigged. The pizza's probably pretty good if they deliver, right? Like, you don't come for the games and eat the pizza just because it's there. Suddenly, I want Pizza Planet to exist, man. Suddenly I just kind of wish in general that restaurant franchises that don't suck were a thing that existed in America, but they ain't. Woody finds Andy, but Buzz goes for a spaceship. And of course, the spaceship is actually a claw machine, inhabited entirely by tiny, three-eyed toy Martians. Generally, the Toy Story franchise simply calls these characters aliens, or squeeze toy aliens if they have to be more specific. They're squeaky toys, you see. A lot of Toy Story fans, however, prefer to call them by the name they have in the Buzz Lightyear TV series, the LGMs. Stands for Little Green Men. Why these characters are in the Buzz Lightyear TV series when clearly the toys are part of the Pizza Planet franchise, I couldn't tell you. Maybe there was just some cross-promotion between Pizza Planet and the Buzz Lightyear cartoon in-universe. I don't know. The aliens, like Mr. Spell, are voiced by Pixar's own Jeff Pigeon, who is on helium when he does their voice work. Doing ADR dubbing on helium, that's rough, man. It's like you have to hold your breath until your cue, but since your lungs are full of helium instead of oxygen, holding your breath is like, yeesh. Basically, it's a big sacrifice. Probably the reason that here in the first film, some of the aliens are also played by voice actress Debbie Derryberry. In later installments, when there's only 3 of them, Jeff can play them all without dying of helium overdose. Woody joins Buzz in the claw machine, but they have to take cover when who should show up but Sid, and he starts playing it. To their misfortunes, Sid wins the very alien who is covering Buzz's face, and thrilled to see there's a Buzz Lightyear in the claw machine, he tries again, and wins Buzz and Woody. Worth mentioning, I suppose, that the aliens worship the claw, claiming that it's their master, and it chooses who gets to go on to the next life. I mean, I guess that is, like, really iconic, and, iconic stuff means has to go in Keys and Kingdoms. And, it's also a sign that, it's true what they say. It's just a thing in this universe. For some reason, science fiction-themed toys believe themselves and everything around them to be real. Still, you know what the most realistic thing is in any movie ever? The notion that you could play a claw game twice and win 3 toys in the process, as opposed to, say, playing 3,000 times and never getting a single toy because it's fucking rigged. Sid returns home, so at least they're in proximity to Andy's house. It's a step forward. And we meet Sid's dog Scud, who quickly savages the alien, as well as his sister Hannah, played by Sarah Freeman. It appears she was an extremely prolific child actress, Toy Story being her biggest gig, but only dabbles these days, very consistently works throughout the 90s, but then she's got 1 gig in 2004, then her next one in 2011, and that's it, unless this 2019 credit where she plays Hannah again is new, which I doubt. Timon and Pumbaa at the movies. This isn't a real show. This is some cobbled-together YouTube thing, which should not be on IMDb at all, much less on the IMDb resumes of the actual Toy Story and Lion King voice actors. Somebody gotta get rid of that. And I neglected to mention earlier that Sid himself is played by Eric Von Detten, who, unlike John Morris, was an extremely prolific child actor and did stay fairly active as an adult actor until... his last credit is for his cameo in Toy Story 3. That's weird. He was a normal actor, and then boom, Toy Story 3, and then he disappeared. Anyway, Sid steals Hannah's doll, Janie, and does his usual thing, playing doctor by switching Janie's head with that of a toy pterodactyl. Hannah goes to tell on their mom, who I get the feeling wouldn't care, and Sid pursues. Woody tries to escape. Sid's door is locked from the inside when he's outside of it for some stupid reason. Guess he wants to keep the toys in. And any of Woody's attempts to escape are blocked by Sid's other mutant toys. The baby doll head atop an erector set, the fishing pole with sexy legs, the Jack-in-the-Box with the scary Frankenstein hand. You know 'em. Gosh, I wonder if any K&K monsters can be made from these things. I mean, they'd be way too creepy if they weren't toys, I'd have to say. They ignore Woody and collect the remnants of Janie and the pterodactyl, so foreshadowing. Andy and his mom return home. Andy now upset that he can't find his Woody or his Buzz. At this point, only Bo and Slinky still believe in Woody's innocence. Everyone else writes Buzz off as dead, and Woody is having fled to avoid justice. Next morning, Sid plays with Woody and Buzz a bit. Funny thing, Sid is always pretending and role-playing while he's disfiguring toys, you know? He doesn't just mutilate them, he portrays a villain who does so. Kinda worth noting, I guess. When Sid goes down for breakfast, he finally leaves the door open, so Woody and Buzz make a break for it, but a sleeping Scud is blocking their path to the front door. And when Woody's string is accidentally pulled, Scud is no longer asleep and they have to book it. The pair of them split up, Buzz finding himself in Sid's dad's man cave, where the dad is passed out drunk with the TV blaring, and here Buzz has to face the truth, because here Buzz sees a commercial on TV for himself. A commercial narrated by a very hammy Penn Jillette, that's a delightful little cameo there, provides Buzz with the conclusive proof that he's nothing but a toy, that there's hundreds just like him on the shelves of Al's Toy Barn. Randy Newman sings "I Will Go Sailing No More" in the background as Buzz processes this mind-bending revelation. Ultimately, he decides he doesn't believe it, and he seeks to prove it to himself by flying out Sid's window. Naturally, he fails, and falls down a flight of stairs, one of his arms popping off from the impact. You know, I kind of have issue with the fact that the commercial calls Buzz Lightyear the world's greatest superhero. I wouldn't call the Buzz Lightyear character a superhero. It just seems like the wrong word. Space Ranger is like a totally different kind of thing. Now's as good a time as any to mention the Buzz Lightyear movie that Pixar is working on. It was recently announced. Chris Evans will be playing Buzz Lightyear, and apparently it's the movie that inspired in-universe the Buzz Lightyear toy. So that's kind of a retcon going on. The movie that started the TV series Buzz Lightyear of Star Command has a prologue in which Andy's toys settle in to watch the Buzz Lightyear movie, and as I recall, there being a Buzz Lightyear movie is a new development. Wherever the idea for the character came from, we at least know that the toy predates the movie. I guess Buzz Lightyear of Star Command is no longer canon as a metafictional thing within the Toy Story universe. Apparently Pixar has never really been fond of the way it turned out, the Buzz Lightyear TV show. Neither the movie nor the series are on Disney+. I guess when Buzz Lightyear of Star Command pops up in my collection, I hope there's a good DVD of it out there somewhere. I haven't had to get a DVD for this project since the Brave Little Toaster. Oof, they're going for pretty high prices on Amazon. Maybe I can find some good ones used. It's a risk I'm going to have to take. I hope I can figure it out. I've never skipped a movie in this collection before. Yeah, and I'll have to get a DVD player, too. This laptop doesn't have a disk drive. Is an external USB DVD drive a thing? It must be, right? Woody emerges from his hiding place in the hall closet. The carpeting in the hallway at Sid's house is the same as the carpeting in The Shining. That's a nice touch. Andrew Stanton is a huge Shining fanboy. Took a lot of inspiration from its musical score when working on Finding Nemo, of all things. Hannah has found Buzz and his severed arm and is having a tea party with them, along with a teddy bear and 2 dolls, all headless, presumably thanks to Sid's machinations. Once she's gone, Woody goes to retrieve Buzz, who is too drunk on imaginary tea to properly communicate or cooperate with Woody. So Woody's on his own, but decides to instead open Sid's bedroom window and try to enlist the help of Andy's toys right there on the other side of the driveway. He tosses them a string of Christmas lights, but Mr. Potato Head isn't willing to let him cross. Buzz is too depressed to show himself, so Woody puts on a very unconvincing puppet show with Buzz's severed arm that only serves to convince them that Woody murdered Buzz. Even Bo and Slinky have turned against him now, and he's truly alone. Sid's mutant toys, meanwhile, have converged on Buzz, and they fix him, popping his arm back into the socket. Woody sees Janie and the pterodactyl among them, restored to their proper form, and Woody realizes he's had them all wrong. Sid returns with his package from Ill Eagle Fireworks. That there's a pun. The company that sold Andy's house is called Virtual Realty, and something tells me those jokes were Joss Whedon editions. I don't know, it just feels that way. So yes, Sid ordered a rocket called the Big One, and he tapes it to Buzz with the intention of sending him blasting off into the sky, only to realize that it's raining this evening, so he'll go outside and blow up Buzz in the morning. To Woody's misfortune, Sid puts his toolbox on top of the milk crate Woody is hiding in, so for the time being, Woody is trapped, and Buzz, still basically catatonic over his maddening revelation. As Sid sleeps, Woody finally gets some life out of Buzz, finally gets an explanation. Buzz has gone mad with depression over his realization that he's a toy. He finds himself insignificant now, he really thought all along that he was a space ranger out to save the universe. Woody tells him, hey, being a toy ain't so bad. After all, Buzz Lightyear is Andy's very favorite toy. And that's why Woody's always hated him so much, for being better, for making Andy want Buzz more. Buzz stares in awe at Andy's name on the bottom of his boot and goes to get Woody out of the crate. And it's morning already. It was nearly dawn before they finally started talking to each other. Weird timeline, but okay. They get Woody free from the crate. Just as the moving truck parks in front of Andy's house, and just as Sid's alarm clock goes off, Sid wakes up and instantly sets to work on his blow-up Buzz Lightyear plan. Woody sees that he'll need to get past Scud if he's going to get out into the yard to save Buzz, and he enlists the help of Sid's mutant toys to concoct a plan that involves breaking a few rules, whatever that may mean. Yeah, we don't know why the rules are in place, we just know that they're the reason we never see our toys walking around. So Woody's super quickly concocted and expertly enacted plan involves some of Sid's toys sneaking through an air vent and ringing the front doorbell. So Hannah comes to the door. At the same time, they unleash a toy frog into the hallway for Scud to chase, specifically to chase all the way out the front door so that Woody and the rest of them can skateboard their way downstairs through the kitchen and out the dog door without Scud interrupting. Once they're all in the backyard, they get into position. Woody places himself in the center of the yard so Sid will find him. Sid puts Woody on the barbecue grill with the intent of melting him later, and Woody starts talking. First with the pre-recorded sayings from his voice box, then he has the voice box speak directly to Sid about how toys don't like being mutilated. Sid's toys emerge from every direction like zombies, and Woody tells Sid never to treat his toys so shamefully again, to play nice. Sid is successfully scarred for life and flees into his house. Hannah getting a little revenge on him by immediately picking up on Sid's sudden fear of toys and taunting him with her Sally doll. Fortunately, Sid seemingly isn't scarred for life. At least he's in a pretty good mood when we get a brief glimpse of him in Toy Story 3. Woody and Buzz head out just in time to catch up to the moving truck. Scud sees them chasing it, and we enter our extremely epic and expertly choreographed climactic action sequence. Buzz is the first one on the truck, but valiantly saves Woody from Scud, falling off the van himself in the process. Woody climbs into the truck and with grim purpose finds RC and tosses him off the van so the little car can save Buzz. Andy's other toys take this for another addition to Woody's killing spree and swiftly overpower Woody and toss him overboard as well. No matter, Woody still has the remote, so he too climbs aboard RC. They lose Scud at an intersection, and the three of them pursue the truck. When Lenny spots Woody, RC, and Buzz alive and well, the toys realize Woody was telling the truth all along. Slinky tries to retrieve them, but RC runs out of batteries, and they're left behind. Not ready to give up hope yet, Woody and Buzz figure they can catch up to the truck if they light the rocket. They do, realizing too late that the rocket is going to explode and kill them once it's done propelling them. But they do catch up to the truck, getting RC back into it because this is the climax. Can't have some third guy accompanying our heroes at the climax. As they fly up and up and up, Buzz finally has the idea to hit the button that extends his wings, severing the tape fastening the rocket to him. So the rocket goes straight up, while Buzz, with his wings extended, catches a little current of wind that allows him to fall with style. To fly after a fashion right over the truck and into the family car, right next to Andy. Dissolve to the following Christmas. And, I always forget that, they do... It does snow in Toy Story films sometimes, so I guess that means it's not set in Emeryville, California, the home of Pixar, as a lot of people assume. Once again, the toys are spying on the opening of gifts, but feeling more optimistic than they did at Andy's birthday, now hoping that new toys means new companions. Molly receives a Mrs. Potato Head, to Mr. Potato Head's excitement. Woody and Buzz are eager to face whatever's coming next, only slightly thrown off when Andy's first present is a puppy. The credits roll to You've Got a Friend in Me, not the well-known solo Randy Newman version, but a duet between Newman and Lyle Lovett. Lyle Lovett being a guy who actually sings like a human, so, improvement. And that's about it. No one unexpected in the credits, just lots of Pixar guys. And the song is quite short, so, most of the credits roll over score, Randy Newman score, so it's pretty lame. Basically, Randy Newman is the kind of music that tells you, hey, feel this way now. And, well, that score was pretty short, too. These were very short end credits. I guess Pixar being very new and all, they didn't really have all that many people working on this film. Wow. So that's 1995, and, well, I think I've said quite enough about my opinions and observations about these three films. We are deep into this thing, and, hey, I just feel this segment is going to keep getting longer as, Disney films get bigger and more worth talking about. Maybe it'll cool down a little bit after the Renaissance. 95 was a good year, and I am so very happy to be recording this podcast here in my new apartment in Quincy. It's pretty awesome. And now we're back in Droon. Gosh, feels like it's been a while. The story is now coming to a close with only 4 books left to go. 4 books which make up the 6th and final season of my fantasy adaptation. Last week I finally finished a video I recorded months ago where I talk about the entirety of the adaptational ideas I've had over the course of this podcast segment, including ideas about Season 6 I haven't talked about here yet. Author Tony Abbott loved my video, and he tagged the Scholastic and Scholastic UK Twitter accounts in his reply, which got me briefly paranoid that maybe Scholastic would like my idea so much that they'd ask me to get started working on the series right now, which would be incredible, don't get me wrong. It'd certainly get TAPAS off the ground way ahead of schedule, but I'm very much underqualified. I know the web series I intend to make still don't count as professional experience in the art world even now in 2020, but at least their experience, at least I'd have a vague idea how to make a cartoon by then. Right now, I do not. But yeah, Tony loved my video, and so did his wife, and Tony follows me on Twitter now, so I'd better brush up on my behavior around there and be active and interesting and funny. Anyway, we're at Book 35, The Lost Empire of Koomba. This and Book 36 are very much filler entries in the story. I don't think anything truly important happens in them at all. I don't think the 4 members of the Crown of Wizards even turn up. They don't really get closer to their goal of freeing Eric. It's just random Droon stuff for 2 books. The final 2 books, Special Editions 7 and 8, are where we engage in the real beginning of the end of the saga. Chapter 1, The Riddle in the Smoke. We open on Julie and Neil breaking into Eric's house before dawn so they can slip into the basement, following the call of Neil's recent dreams about green snowdrifts. We're getting a lot of Julie's thoughts here, so I guess this one's told from Julie's perspective, yeah. I should make note of that. Nearly every book in the series is told in third-person limited from Eric's perspective. That might be a good source of changes to make in the adaptation. Scenes that definitely happened, but which Eric wasn't present for. The series broke away from this for 2 very special occasions. Special Edition 2 was first person from Kia's point of view, Special Edition 4 likewise for Spar. But then formula was broken in a big way when Eric got hit by Ko's poisoned ice dagger at the end of Book 33. The last few paragraphs of that book were told, if I recall correctly, from nobody's perspective in particular, as we followed Julie and Neil up the stairs. And then Book 34 alternated between Eric and, I guess, Neil? I know Neil had at least one moment in that book where he was alone, but I don't recall ever really getting into Neil's head like we are with Julie here. Maybe a little. Then Special Edition 6 was mostly from Kia's perspective with a little bit from Ungast. And now we're here in Julie's head. I don't remember who narrates the final normal edition book, naturally, as I didn't remember until just now that we get a lot of what Julie's thinking about here in Book 35, but Special Edition 7, obviously told from Neil's perspective, since it's called The Genie King and All, and that's Neil, and then I think we're back in Eric's head for the entirety of the final book. But this isn't our first time in Julie's head, now I remember. Special Edition 5 split its time between Eric and Kia and Julie and Neil, and yes, I remember now, Eric was our viewpoint character for his half, and Julie for her half. Anyway, that's something worth noting, these moments where we get into the characters' heads, because a cartoon set in Droon needs all the help it can get with its characterization. quips I made way back in the very first episode of this podcast still very much apply. Eric is a blank slate, Julie is Eric in a training bra, Neil is a laundry list of comic relief sidekick traits. The only thing that's changed is that now they each have different superpowers, which would set them apart if their powers were well-defined and used cleverly, but they're really not so much. Something else to note for an adaptation. So we need to do some characterization, some continuity that the original series lacked. Plot twists land amazingly here in the books, don't get me wrong, but I think their emotional impact can be done better. Yeah, I've just left myself a note to listen to all of my Droon segments before starting on vlogging about Droon, so that I remember all my significant thoughts and don't have to rediscover them later and can present a big unified thing for my future pitch to Scholastic. Why am I telling you this? You don't exist. Nobody listens to the Droon segment. I'm talking to air. Hopefully the vlogs will have an audience. People interested in Droon will be able to find it because, unlike this podcast, it'll have Secrets of Droon in the title. Okay, back to the book. Recap. Julie has a vision of Galen. He is accompanied by a figure Julie assumes to be Anusa, except he seems to be afraid of her. When Julie snaps back to reality, she finds Mrs. Hinkle in Eric's bedroom, waiting for them. It transpires that when Kia erased Mrs. Hinkle's memory in the previous book, it didn't take. Motherly love and fear brought everything back the moment she noticed Eric's empty bed. And if they need to go back to Droon, Mrs. Hinkle wants to come with them. Mr. Hinkle gets a very cringy and incomplete recap of the status quo, and he comes to Droon too. He's involved here in this final arc, and he's pretty cringy. He's quite underqualified. It was pretty cool when he had a role to play in Droon way back in Book 8, but he's really over his head in this final arc, and a dork. He mispronounces all the Droonian names he uses. It just kind of makes me cringe. The four of them descend these stairs and end up at River Tangle. Another continuity note, I found on the Scholastic website the map of Droon that appears at the very end of the final book. And that'll be another great way to figure out continuity. As far as I can tell from looking at the map now, the geography of Droon remains consistent. Like, I can't think of any point where they dash from one location to another, and the locations, they're actually nearby when they do that. So that's I can't think of any exceptions. So that's good. So we, the readers, didn't get a map until the very end of the series, but I guess it's not a stretch to assume Tony had one all along. I bring that up because River Tangle ain't on the map. At least it's not labeled. This tangle of rivers might be it, I suppose. I guess I'll have to reread the books. I'm pretty sure River Tangle debuts in Special Edition 2, so as I can figure out the rough geographical location of River Tangle. Not the only mentioned location not seen on the map. Chapter 2, a really good library. At River Tangle, they see an encampment of snakelings, a species of beast fairly common here in the final arc. The illustrations in this book indicate that snakelings are just big-ass snakes. That doesn't work for me. I think they should be snakes with arms. And I hate this joke. Neil says they work for you-know-who, and Mrs. Hinkle is like, Voldemort? I like the jolt of being like 40 books in and seeing a super blatant Harry Potter reference, but there's absolutely no reason for Neil to have referred to Gethwing as you-know-who. It's a pretty cheap setup for a cheap shot. The snakeling leader, fella by the name of Slyvor, recognizes the Hinkles as old and inexperienced and has his people target them. There's a quick scuffle, and soon the snakelings have kidnapped the Hinkles, who are just being annoying. I like in principle how they get kidnapped the moment they're in Droon. It's a good representation of how experienced our heroes have become, but they're here to rescue their son. Take the moment seriously, would you, Tony? Anyway, Neil and Julie have a moment of realization where they're like, man, we have a lot of crap to do in the 5-day time frame Eric gave us before the attack on Jaffa City. Cripes. The pair of them fly to Zorfendorf Castle and meet with Kia, who tells Julie that the vision she saw has already come to pass. Galen has left them on the quest on which Anusa called him. In the library of Zorfendorf Castle, they find Max, Hob, and Thog looking for stuff. Apparently the moon medallion was stolen from Jaffa City, so they're trying to find some other cure for Eric. Hob finds something. Apparently the poison used on Eric was Fazul, a burning green substance that instantly kills the poisoned. Eric lives because one drop of Fazul was missing. So it's kind of like the potion from Disney's Hercules. You gotta take the whole thing. And that one drop now can be the antidote. So anyway, yeah, something about poison trade in the Crimson Desert, which is also not on the map of Droon. And in the Crimson Desert is the lost empire of Koomba. That's where they'll find the last drop of Fazul, because you see, in the Crimson Desert are the Sand Children and Empress Mashta. People not alluded to, since Mashta was mentioned offhandedly but not seen as being in attendance of the Royal Summit back in Book 8. The Sand Children have a habit of stealing things in the night. And so if, poison traders were ever along the trade routes in the Crimson Desert, the Sand Children would have taken it, and they'll be in possession of the last drop of Fazul. Okay. If I sound hesitant, it's because I ad-libbed a lot of that, because in my script, I didn't understand what was going on at all, but it came back to me as I was reading the script, so I had to rephrase the script to reflect that, yeah, I get it now. Okay. They go by Pilka because all Pilkas know the ancient trade routes, so they'll know where the Sand Children probably would have been. Chapter 3, The Sandwich is There. The three kids, accompanied by Hob rather than Max. Nice change of pace, though one note I've always had that I hope to improve in the adaptation: which supporting character the three kids are allied with from book to book is usually completely arbitrary. I'd want to give each of these supporting characters more personal investment in the quests they accompany. And one thing I know is that the most loyal and iconic supporting characters, namely Khan and Batamogi, get seriously shafted in this final story arc. I think they make tiny appearances in book 36, and then that's it. Got to do better by these dudes, not just in the final story arc, but in general. Give them more motivation than just because Tony decided they're the wacky comic relief for this book. Anyway, our heroes ride to the Crimson Desert, and Kia warns them that they may need to watch out for Nins now that Spar is on Gethwing's side. Now, this book was published in 2009, and one thing I do like about it was that Tony was clearly on a How I Met Your Mother kick. That was cool to me because so was I the first time I read through to the end of the series. I know he'd been watching How I Met Your Mother because there's a running gag throughout the book of Hob overusing the word legendary, and Slyvor makes a wait for it joke. Both beloved Barney Stinson running gags. Not a coincidence, methinks. The title of the chapter is derived from a joke Neil tells. Why can you never go hungry in a desert? Because of the sand which is there. And Julie remembers Neil learning that joke, even though she wasn't there when he did. She's not sure why she's suddenly having visions of the recent past. When they reach the site where Koomba lies buried in the sand, Julie has visions of the Empire in all its glory. They reach the trading post and enter the local bar, the Cantina du Koomba. Hob gives them masks that result in pretty stupid disguises. I don't like how the kids keep getting disguised as beasts that look dumb. The beasts are supposed to all be scary. The ones that, Kid Spar turns them into are okay, but these are awful. And, they need a better name than just beasts. All creatures are beasts. I also don't like how many creatures in Droon have odd numbers of legs and multiple ears. Those are just recurring design motifs. There's gotta be cooler designs. Gosh, I am being super critical of Droon today. Don't know why. I guess what I'm doing is prepping for the vlog series I'll be doing after this podcast segment is over, when I start giving serious thought to the adaptation. They enter the cantina. Chapter 4, At the Crossroads. In the cantina, they try to act beastly, and they come across Captain Bludge and some other Nins. Bludge says that Spar hasn't been himself since he's been under Gethwing's command, and he's waiting on Gethwing's people to come and pick up a night fox they've captured. Lots of kinds of foxes in Droon. I kind of want to learn more. Moon foxes, star foxes, and now night foxes. And the moon foxes talk. They wait, and soon the lion-headed Captain Grunto enters. Beasts that resemble lions are fairly common, and, something I've been thinking about, toward the tail end here. I've been thinking we got to take all the beast names that Ko calls out when he's first resurrected and assigns each one to a species of beast often described within the pages. So Grunto can be of the same species as the lion guys, whatever name we decide to call them, perhaps Knobclaws. He's been put in charge of the Nins, formerly under Captain Bludge's command, and he's here for the fox. Bludge wants to know what the fox has done and why Gethwing wants it, but Grunto refuses to tell. This is when the Sand Children turn up and steal some stuff, including the fox. The heroes ditch their masks so they can pursue the Sand Children, and Grunto commands the Nins to chase our heroes as well. Chapter 5, Below the Sand. The kids and Hob go fast enough that they can see the Sand Children diving into their hideout, and they follow. The opening small enough for kids and Hob, but not for Bludge and Grunto and their posse. They find themselves in a huge cavern, hundreds of feet across and deep, and they have to descend a very long staircase to get to the floor. They see the Sand Children's city, and finally get a clear look at the children themselves. Despite their name, they're adult humans, but very tiny, about a foot tall, and dressed in red and silver. And Empress Machta introduces herself. The Night Fox frolics free, and Julie asks if this is Koomba. Machta answers yes and no. The original empire of Koomba is lost, but the Sand Children have built a new Koomba atop the ruins. The latest treasure of the Sand Children is the claw of a young wing wolf. The Hawkoth Mall shed their newborn claws like baby teeth, and the young ones, in addition to the flight and shape-shifting Julie inherited, also have a third power, losing their memory of the power along with the power itself when their baby claws are shed. Baby claws? That's stupid. Why can't they just be teeth? That's normal. Upon learning why Kia and her friends are there, Machta immediately knows that they're after the Fazul. They confirm that they took the silver vial from the tavern long ago, but it was a mistake. A monster took the vial from them and now prowls their lower tunnels where they dare not venture anymore. Machta gives the kids a mechanical Tuscadon for them to pilot down into the forbidden passages to protect themselves from the monster. The Tuscadon has been here since the Sand Children moved in, and they don't know how to drive it, but seemingly the Night Fox does. They enter the forbidden passages. Chapter 6, About a Boy. It's strangely windy in the passages. As they travel, Julie notices crude little drawings of birds all over the mechanical Tuscadon's interior, and knows from her visions that a young spar drew them. The Tuscadon must have belonged to him. They don't get very far before the Tuscadon overheats and explodes, collapsing the tunnel. But through the rubble comes the green, toothy tentacles of the monster that stole the Fazul. Someone needs to distract the monster so someone else can make their way through that rubble and find the Fazul. Being our viewpoint character, naturally it's Julie who volunteers to go through the gap. Chapter 7, The Face of Fazul. Julie finds herself in the golden streets of ancient Koomba. The scar from when the Hawkoth Mall scratched her is starting to throb and itch. Some purple smoke shows her a message from Galen. The recording, so to speak, tells her that he is the one who stole the moon medallion, and no one will see it in 100 years. Julie is, not put at ease by that. She also finds a tiny silver vial of the Fazul, and once more, she has a mysterious vision of the past, revealing to her that the monster her friends are currently battling came out of the vial. The monster is the potion. She runs back to the others, and knowing that the monster likes it cold, she has Neil summon some snow. This calms the monster, turning it back into the single drop of Fazul, which they gather back into the bottle. They run back to the Sand Children, who are being besieged by Grunto's guys, and the kids can hear the Hinkles as well, suggesting these snakelings are around too. Chapter 8, Crazy Cantina. Back up in the desert, Grunto and Slivor have the Hinkles. Julie remarks that the Hinkles don't seem to realize the danger they're in, which, okay, that's fair enough. Maybe the Hinkles are having trouble taking Droon seriously because it looks so fanciful. That's not a bad angle, and I can work with that. Still, missing sun, though. Kia, Neil, Julie, Hob, and the Night Fox consider their options and decide to attack head-on. This proves a bad idea, as Slivor and Grunto demand the Fox for the Hinkles' lives. Chapter 9, The Great Mask Mystery. Before the two monsters can off the Hinkles, the entire population of Sand Children bursts in to overwhelm the bad guys, allowing the heroes to escort the Hinkles away. They're still having far too good a time, not realizing their lives were at stake, I get, but, the kids used to think Droon adventures were pretty cool too, but still, missing sun, does that not kill the mood? So our people, they get the Hinkles into the Undercity, but that entrance has been weakened enough that Bludge is able to force himself in and follow. I like Bludge being an antagonist here. I should have gone into it more. Bludge captures the Night Fox, but in the process, the two masks the Night Fox is wearing fall off. The Night Fox has actually been Kem all along. Julie and Bludge realize that the reason Gethwing wanted to get rid of the Night Fox was that if Spar was reunited with Kem, he might remember himself and remember what side he's on, turn against Gethwing. The sight of Kem has certainly reminded Bludge of where his allegiances are, and he hopes he can save Spar. Seeing that the Nins have turned on them, Grunto and Slivor call for the attack. Chapter 10, The Way Up and Out. The attack consists of basically bouncing around in the sands of the Crimson Desert, the tremors up there making the cavern city beneath the dunes get kinda shaky. Mashta worries that the new Koomba might be buried just as the old one was. As the Nins go to defend the city against the beasts, the kids, Hob, Kem, and the Hinkles pile into the nearly destroyed Tuscadon, which Kem manages to get working again. The attack they make with the Tuscadon turns out to be making it explode for real. While Bludge and the Nins pretend that they haven't turned coat, they guide the beasts away on a false trail, claiming the children are fleeing. I think the logistics of what's going on in this book, of where everybody is, it's kind of hard for me to wrap my head around for some strange reason. I hope I can figure it out later. With the beasts gone, Bludge and Kem set off on a quest to find Lord Spar and bring him back to his true self. The Sand Children gift Julie with the Wingwolf Claw. I guess they don't just up and say it outright that the third special power that young Wingwolves have is the ability Julie's been displaying all book about looking into the past. The Rainbow Stairs return, and as Kia and Hob ride off to do what they can with the elixir, the two kids and Eric's parents ascend to the upper world so they can descend back to Droon again as soon as possible. As they near the top of the stairs, Julie has another vision. The three Kindu hunters in the parking lot of their school. The four of them set off immediately. So, okay book, I guess. I found it really frustrating, and confusing. Maybe there's something fuzzy going on in my brain, I'm not sure. Fun though, I like how it mixed things up. It's pretty good. Yeah, like I said, when I first read through the book, I did not get what was going on with the Fazul and how one missing drop, and then that missing drop is the elixir, and it really... Yeah, I didn't get that whole thing at all, but rereading my script made me understand it, and then, although, the positioning in the final battle of this book, I still don't get. Casting, last bout of it. Let's start with Mashta. I would cast popular voice actress Kate Higgins. Of course, since Mashta appears way back in Book 8, that would mean she would have been cast way back then, since the original idea was live action, but for the animated version, obviously, even if the actor wouldn't have to turn up until just now, Kate Higgins is still an excellent choice, and, not only for being my original choice, but also for the much cheaper animated version I've been pondering recently. For Slivor, I was thinking of James Hong, whom you might remember as the elderly Chinese man from every movie and television program ever made. And I'm barely exaggerating there. Apparently he's the record holder for the most feature film appearances by any actor in the history of film. Holy shit. Seemingly still at it, well into a very, very advanced age. That's super cool. And for Grunto, Gary Anthony Williams, a longtime voice actor and improv comedian who just seems to be getting more and more prominent and popular as time goes on. I was picturing something like the late Michael Clark Duncan, and I think Gary could pull that off. And now, a fanfic segment. No big intro. We're halfway through a fic. Second half of In My Absence. Let's see if Fang being there for it was an actual piece of foreshadowing in any way. Chapter 9 is narrated by Nudge, who reports that after Iggy's pep talk in the previous chapter, Fang is feeling a bit better. Still subdued, but getting better. As the five of them practice, Total arrives at the ICBG base. God, I hate Total. And Iggy vocally expresses how Total showing up is a pretty damn bad idea. Get some jabs and punches in, I guess. Dr. Martinez and Ella arrive there as well. Ella very enthusiastically greets Iggy, somewhat to Nudge's alarm. That's interesting. I know that in the real books, Iggy ended up with Ella, not Nudge, but I don't remember how much lead-in there was to it. Yeah, actually, I think by the time this fic started, it had been mentioned that Ella was attracted to Iggy, so yeah, makes sense I'd stick that in. I still went for Iggy Nudge because I'd been a fan of it, but yeah, there's absolutely no Iggy Nudge content in the books. They go firmly Iggy Ella, yeah. Having to inform Ella and Dr. Martinez about Max's disappearance, along with the baby, actually causes Fang to curl up into a ball and scream. Ugh, it's intense. Ella comforts Fang, and Dr. Martinez regretfully informs him that there are bigger things to think about. Fang is distressed at this, but knows there's stuff to do. Nudge takes Iggy aside, and they talk about their relationship. Nudge suddenly wondering if it may have been better if he'd gone for Ella instead. They reference the past relationships that Fang and Max had in the book. Fang had Lissa, and Max had Sam. Sam? I don't think I remember Sam, or do I? Yeah, I had to think really, really hard about it for a moment, but yeah, I do. I think Sam must have been in the second book, I think. About the same time Fang was dating Lissa, and the last time Max saw Sam, she was super terrified and thought he was an eraser, and then never saw him again, and it's never confirmed whether he really was an eraser or she was just having a moment of paranoia. Yeah. I think that's all accurate. It all came back to me. I had no memory of any of that stuff a moment ago. Came flooding back. I simply must read these books again someday. Nudge and Iggy muse about whether themselves and Max and Fang were literally built with the intention of being each other's soulmates. Iggy thinks that's ridiculous, that you can't harness and control love like that. You can't build a soul. In the author's note for this chapter, I confirm that this theme was referencing my thoughts on the then upcoming 6th book, which was going to introduce Dylan, a bird kid slightly different from the main flock who was allegedly designed to be Max's soulmate. Well, that 6th book, if I'm right, does indeed have a line in it rather similar to my "you can't build a soul" thesis statement. The line in the book is, "the soul cannot be programmed." That's what they say there. I forget exactly how Dylan's story goes. I want to say he falls for Max, there's some love triangle stuff, and it seems like Dylan really does have a shot for a time because Fang mistrusts Dylan so much that he actually ditches the flock and starts his own mutant gang. But ultimately, Dylan dies, I think. Don't quote me on that, I don't really remember. What I do know is that in the 9th and final book, which I have not read because it came out long after the 8th book that was supposed to be the final one, Max and Fang do actually have sex, a topic that was never addressed in the first 8 books, so, yeah, it didn't really work out for Dylan, did it? Chapter 10, told in third person, this chapter returns us to Keegan. We learn that Keegan is one of Jules' 7 so-called colonels, herself, Bridget, and a quintet of Chinese mercenaries. I think that makes it the first reference to these characters. These 5, I don't know if I had a name, maybe they were just called the 5. They were based on the Furious 5 from Kung Fu Panda. I had always found it odd that those characters' names were the English word for their species and thought it would have been way cooler and more internally consistent if their names had been, the Mandarin word for their species. So the 5 in this story, their given names are the Mandarin words. Maybe they were derived from a quick Google translation, and when I look up those words again, I tend to get different results. But the Mandarin words for the names of the Furious 5, while their surnames were derived from the surnames of the Furious 5's voice actors, just changed to sound more Chinese. Of the 5 of them, well, I know 3 of them actually became important in the story. I can't recall at the moment what happens to the other 2. I suppose they die. It took a while after these characters' introductions before they really became part of the story, which is kind of neat, introducing someone who's just kind of hanging around for a while until prominent. A funny thing, there's a lot of emphasis on how, their surnames come before their given names because they're Chinese. It's a really typical kid thing to do in a fanfic, hey, here's the thing I know about another culture, I'm gonna hammer you over the head with it. Anyway, the 5, well, like most characters from the fanfic, they will be appearing in my original story, Iris, later, probably with their names changed. I've changed their names a few times in various treatments of Iris. I don't yet know what their final names will be, because my aim for their final names is that they'll be actual Chinese names, not just Chinese words or cool sounds strung together. Anyway, got ahead of myself. These guys haven't been properly introduced yet. What happens in this chapter is that Keegan is in the private cafeteria of Jules' headquarters, and Jewel comes to hang out with her. Jewel expresses that he has intense feelings of love and trust for Keegan that he can't quite explain. Keegan talks about Niles, who it's explained here, if it wasn't already, that he's been smuggled in as one of her lieutenants. Jewel wonders about mutual affections and attractions, how these things form. Keegan says these things just happen. People just click. There's no scientific explanation for it that would satisfy a robot. Keegan goes off to see Niles. Jewel promises her that he'll add Niles to the list of the 100 people who will survive his purge of humanity. Keegan and Niles meet up, and Niles objects to Keegan manipulating reality so that Jewel will spare him, only for Keegan to say she didn't. Jewel must have just always had that kind of compassion within him. What Niles continues to object to is the fact that Keegan brought him back to life after he was killed in Jewel's attack on the day and night school. He loves her, and he's grateful, but he really thinks that if she can use her omnipotent powers to do something like that for herself, she can be more actively helpful in Max saving the world and stuff. Keegan knows he's right, but she's simply too constantly afraid that messing with reality too much will leave it in a state she cannot repair. Chapter 11, 2 consecutive chapters told from the perspective of Jewel's location. Interesting. Jewel and his 7 colonels meet with a famed computer hacker guy named Edward Tagg to see if he can be on the short list for their 100 plan. Jewel messes with Tagg for a while, then slices his throat, admitting to his colonels that he knew right away that Tagg simply wasn't attractive enough to be one of his people, and the whole meeting we just saw was basically just for comic relief. Jewel also tells them that he's looking for absolute cowards to be his 100, people who would never dare try to stab him in the back on account of how dangerous he is. Right about there, a mysterious cloaked figure materializes before Jewel, claiming to represent an organization called the Survivors, wishing to put him on trial for the death of Mr. Chu. Ah, nice. I had forgotten. The phrasing this character uses is very similar to cryptic talk in the narrative of the actual books about the organization to which Mr. Chu belongs, which had not been explained at this point, nor, I think, was it ever explained afterward in the books. So this fanfic called Mr. Chu's organization, the Survivors, meant to be those who will linger on after the world destroys itself. And their leader is this holographic, gender-ambiguous cloaked figure known only as Headmaster. When Headmaster departs, Jewel wryly remarks that if the world is destined to destroy itself, well, he'd better destroy it faster. So yeah, Headmaster and the Survivors debut here. I knew Headmaster was coming up pretty soon, but I had completely forgotten that their organization was called the Survivors and was, a continuation of the book story of Mr. Chu. The Survivors, they stay the big bads of this saga for the entire saga, I guess. Headmaster hasn't been identified by name here yet, but a funny thing. So this story had the big guy, right? The character called the big guy. But all the readers who commented on this story always just called him Big Guy. And then there was Headmaster, and all the readers called that character the Headmaster. Isn't that weird? Like, one name has a the, and the other doesn't, and they, jumbled it. I mean, I get assuming that a character named simply Headmaster is the Headmaster. That does make a lot of sense, obviously, but how do you miss that a character called the Big Guy is the Big Guy? You don't call him just Big Guy. That don't sound right. Anyway. Chapter 12, we return to Fang's perspective. He and all the fellow good guys he's gathered together, including the Green Brothers, these guys again. What the hell was the point of these motherfuckers? They go over the actions they need to take, following Fang's lead, all the while. Danny goes over Jewel's power set. His extra bladed arms can move super fast and cut through anything. He's virtually indestructible on account of being made of diamonds. Not sure if that checks out. I know diamonds are really hard and good for cutting, but somehow I don't think it's that easy. Inside his mouth, he has a number of weapons, including a flamethrower and a supply of smothering spider silk. While his normal arms can punch really hard, also being diamond and all, and can be powered up with an explosive charge. Cool. I like that we got that breakdown. I said it all just now so I could write it down at some later point when I'm playing this back. It'll all be a useful breakdown when writing Jewel into Iris. Fang just wants to charge in, but everyone else thinks they need to make some actual plans, so they talk about sneaking in as lieutenants, like Iggy and Nudge did before. Apparently about 2,000 of Jewel's 30,000 people are lieutenants. How the fuck did he get 30,000 followers in the time since he was introduced? Jeez, best cult leader ever. Anyway, disguised as lieutenants, they can get close to one of Jewel's colonels. I don't think there's any authentic chain of command going on there, but that would be in character for Jewel to just give ranks that sound cool. So they steal that colonel's special laser gun and fire on Jewel at full power with said weapon so that his integrity can be weakened enough that he can be destroyed in a big ol' explosion. The Green Brothers volunteer to be the ones to set off the explosion. Jewel is never alone. They really need to do it quick and in person, so hey, that's what the Green Brothers are for, sacrificing. So there's the plan, though obviously it's not going to work because we, the audience, saw them discussing it ahead of time, so it would be narrative garbage if the plan that the audience heard about actually then worked. Maybe I wasn't aware of that at the time. I mean, I must have known it intuitively, even though I've never thought the words before. Fang makes the executive decision, therefore, that Balthazar and Maddie will go, as will himself, Iggy, and Nudge. Gazzy and Angel will stay behind. Best thing to do, leave the younger kids behind, even over their loud objections. It's a good moment here, one I had always wanted to do and should find a way to do again. Fang says that Gazzy is too reckless to accompany a careful plan like this one, and Gazzy objects that he's not reckless, he totally has wreck. That's pretty good. So, they're advised to take the laser weapons from Bridget and Keegan, as the other 5 are deadly warriors. And Fang's like, deadly warriors? What do you think we are, Muppets? That's funny, too. Doesn't really work in this context. It's another joke stolen from Myth Adventures. Gosh, I ripped off Myth Adventures a lot in this fanfic, way more than I ever ripped off Droon in anything, it seems. Anyway, yeah, I don't think it works in the scene I put it in here. It should be something closer to the context of, of the Myth Adventures joke. Someone being scared of a mutant, and our mutant heroes respond, what do you think we are, Muppets? Except in the context of Myth Adventures, it was, of course, demons, not mutants. Anyway, yeah, that's the end of the chapter. They have a plan. The 3 flock members and the 2 OC mercenary guys who've done nothing up until this point. They're going undercover and attempting to assassinate Jewel. Maybe that'll be it. Gosh, 4 whole chapters to go. That doesn't sound like me back then. Maybe this will be a nice slow burn infiltration storyline. Nice. Let's see, looks like Fang POV again, and they're already in Jewel's compound. Fang explains more about these laser weapons. They were invented by the ICBG and are indeed powerful enough to harm Jewel, for which reason Jewel has at some point gone all over the world to collect every known piece of the alloy used to make the weapon. The weapon is called a vampire. I think I was onto something there, but I don't think I quite made it. I don't think I'd call it the vampire, but that's close. I don't know. I also don't think Jewel would voluntarily give samples of the one weapon that can harm him to his 7 lieutenants, unless his idea was... to his 7 colonels, unless his idea was to taunt them. After all, we've established that the vampire isn't powerful enough to destroy him, only damage him enough to make him unprepared for a big explosion, so... I guess that's solid if you think about it real hard. I want to make my readers think, but I want them to think about issues and themes, not to have to think hard to make sense of character motivations. That's not nice. So let's see, in addition to lieutenants, Jewel's lower level people are called whips and grunts. Whatever the hell that means. It's dumb. Quickly, Fang and his party find Niles, who can get them into contact with Keegan. As they walk, Niles expresses his judgment that Keegan could, solve all of this by disintegrating Jewel with her mind, regretting that fear that holds Keegan back. We get a very brief bit of a backstory on Keegan and Niles' relationship. Niles was a horny Casanova who ruined a lot of girls' lives, and Keegan, as a way to experiment with what she was capable of, drew out just this tiny piece of Niles' personality he'd been suppressing, and turned him into a good person, and fell in love with what she'd created. I'm not sure that quite suits what I was aiming for. Maybe in the Iris version, Keegan does something like make Niles feel what he's made others feel, and he's emotionally destroyed. And then, Keegan builds him up again just by being a companion and helping him make amends, and these little manipulations are the very thing that makes Keegan afraid of using her abilities more. Something like that. Stuff to think about. Then the question is raised about where Keegan's powers come from, and it's basically just explained right here in this walking scene. That doesn't feel right. There really ought to be more drama in a revelation like this, but maybe there's more to it that doesn't get talked about here. What they piece together is that Keegan was an experiment of the school, the same organization that created our protagonists. There's a scene in one of the early books where Max witnesses a baby doing advanced physics equations. Drawing from that, the idea is, at least what our heroes theorize here, is that Keegan was kidnapped as a baby, and they tried to make her one of these enhanced children. But Keegan was already such a genius, so imaginative and creative, that when they enhanced her like one of these other babies, they made her omnipotent. That makes less sense than Keegan being so super imaginative that she becomes omnipotent when she's made into a Twilight vampire. Made more sense in the last story I put Keegan in, but I think I'll still be keeping much of this backstory for her Iris version. There's enough mysticism and paranormal stuff in the Iris universe for this story to make sense there, even if it doesn't quite work in the Maximum Ride universe. Also, all this shilling about Keegan being the most creative and imaginative person who ever lived, I mean, if people are going to say that, we really need to at least actually show Keegan writing some stories sometime if we're ever going to pull that off. Sadly, this being doesn't have time for that, and then this, kind of war story we got going on. Anyway, Niles sends Keegan a little code via keypad, just a simple kind of Niles loves Keegan kind of message. The other colonels just write it off as some lovey-dovey stuff, but when Niles sends it, Keegan knows to use her omniscience to find out exactly what Niles wants. That's a pretty good idea. Bring that back, it's brilliant actually, because you send a love note as a secret code, and what's great is that even if someone does justifiably suspect that it's a secret code, they have absolutely no way to crack it, because none of them know that Keegan is omnipotent, so they have no way to figure out what information Niles is getting to Keegan or how. So, that's a thing that's a thing from this story that stands up to scrutiny for sure. And they do need to send a code because Keegan's not omniscient all the time. That would exhaust her and wear her out. Whew. Had a lot to say about this chapter, considering absolutely nothing happened. Let's continue. So Keegan gives them access to the colonel's room, and focus goes once again to Lao Hu, the leader of the five, a middle-aged Chinese woman. She was there unidentified when the flock first met Jewel. She had a couple of lines in the chapter with Tag and Headmaster. She's going to be big and important. Niles and the fake lieutenants accompanying him start to approach Keegan, who is up on a high balcony along with Jewel. Chapter 14. As they approach, they hear Hoosie, one of the five, making sexual comments about Niles. Dear Lord, I completely forgot about that. I legitimately had no idea I was going to see that. I remembered that I had confirmed Hoosie as basically the first gay character ever to appear in my writing. I was looking forward to seeing how I'd handle it, but god fucking damn it. Note to self, don't make the first confirmed gay character in your story a pedophile. What the hell, young me? Jesus Christ. Well, I'm pretty sure he dies very, very soon after being introduced, so I made him a child molester, and I buried him, so, worst first gay character ever. What the fuck is wrong with me? I'm pretty sure I'd never heard of the concept of bury your gays at that point, but I knew it wasn't a good look for a grown man to ogle a teenage boy. Surely I knew that, right? I'm deeply disappointed in myself. I'm sorry, I just can't get over what a bonehead move that was. So before our heroes can get anything done, Jewel is ambushed by the big guy. I remember my readers being all weirded out about how the big guy came out of nowhere. Well, what I had meant to convey, but didn't really try from the looks of it, was that the big guy dropped down from the ceiling, because he's a gecko, so he can crawl around on ceilings. People won't see him. People tend not to look up, right? Even if he is a giant gecko. Anyway, the big guy, ambushing Jewel unarmed, well, that obviously results in the big guy being horribly wounded. With a giant gash in his stomach, the big guy begs Jewel to allow him to speak. Jewel grants this, but not before having Lao Hu and her team surround Niles and the other lieutenants. Apparently Niles, coming with 5 others, did immediately raise Jewel's suspicions. So the big guy tries to convince Jewel that what he is doing is wrong, this marking the first time that the heroes have heard of the plan to kill all but 100 humans on the planet. Okay, I was wondering for a moment how Jewel intended to do that. It seems he's bioengineered a virus to wipe out humanity. That he's going to whip it out once he finds his 100 special people. Guess that means his folks will get inoculated or something ahead of time. Good to know. And there's an emotional moment here between Jewel and the big guy. The big guy remembers the time when Jewel listened to him and trusted him and loved him, and Jewel sounds a bit weak and sad when he replies that sometimes people change and life goes on, and he doesn't need the big guy's approval anymore. Fang can't see the two of them when he hears the big guy clatter loudly to the floor, possibly killed flawlessly and soundlessly by Jewel. Fang yells out for their sneak attack to begin, which is kind of a bad way to open a sneak attack. Chapter 15. So this fight kind of starts to introduce the 5. Lao Hu, we've already mentioned. She's based on Angelina Jolie's Tigress. And Hoosie, we were unfortunately, we just saw a moment ago. His origins are in Jackie Chan's Monkey, though. Picturing them, it seems they were always to be fairly generic, these two. Then there's also Guan, based on David Cross's Crane. I don't remember anything about his personality, but he's described as a skinny guy with a shaved head, so I guess he's basically, a combination of Crane and David Cross. Most notable are Shay and Lang, based respectively on Lucy Liu's Viper and Seth Rogen's Mantis, and they very much have the kind of comedic chemistry that Lucy Liu and Seth Rogen would have had if Viper and Mantis ever spoke to each other. I don't think they ever really do interact one-on-one, but for whatever reason, the two of them ended up having amazing chemistry in this story, working so well together that I eventually retconned in that they were brother and sister. Okay, this is interesting. Here's the first dialogue exchange between the pair of them, which comes after Iggy and Guan fall through a trapdoor. So Lang and Shay have this conversation. Lang is like, "Whoa, check it out." What's that, a vat of acid? Yup. How long has that been there? It's new. Well, we're going to need a new Guan. Yeah, too bad we don't have a DNA sample, because then we can make another one looks just like him. So that's it's interesting, that casual talk about the vat of acid. I remember wanting to use that line in something else. I had no idea that I actually have written it into something. Vat of acid? Yeah, it's new. Gotta put it in something real, don't I? Also, did I just kill off Guan literally before he's done anything? I didn't expect that. Iggy escapes the vat of acid, dumps a water cooler there in the break room on himself, and Fang's narration remarks he didn't have much skin left, but he was alive. Yikes. And okay, Fang saves Guan from the acid. Okay, so maybe Guan doesn't die yet, but if he does anything ever, I don't remember what it was. Jewel commands them to stop. He's got the virus in a little canister, and he says that if he has to, he will unleash it right now and wipe out all of humanity, even though only 8 people have been immunized. He's ambushed again by the big guy, who's actually explicitly on the ceiling this time. He'd gotten up from, however Jewel knocked him down earlier. With amazing willpower, the big guy grabs Jewel by the wrists, preventing him being able to open the canister. Bridget tosses Fang her vampire gun, blowing in the wind as ever. Fang knows that he has to vaporize the entire canister or else the virus will be unleashed, and he thinks he can't do that, so he has Iggy do it. Iggy, aiming purely with his hearing and his feelings, takes the shot and succeeds, also naturally vaporizing the hand Jewel was holding it in. So the vampire is even more deadly to Jewel than we thought, I guess. Also, unfortunately, blows a big hole in the big guy's torso, killing him. This moment, having to vaporize a canister with a virus in it before it wipes out humanity, I stole that idea from an Animorphs book. Lots of my writing when I was a kid ripped off all sorts of stuff from Droon and Myth Adventures and Animorphs. I'm surprised to see I was still doing that in college. It's kind of cool, it takes me way back. Anyway, Fang, Nudge, and Iggy need to collect themselves. It's not over yet just because they've gotten the virus. They have to get Jewel, too. There's a quick one-on-one battle, Fang versus Jewel. Fang shooting Jewel over and over again with the vampire, blowing little chunks off of his body. Why doesn't the gun properly damage him? It just vaporized his hand. Anyway, Jewel has another power here that we need to note. He points his index finger at Fang and shoots an invisible beam that causes intense pain. Fang is able to shrug off the pain and keep on coming, and Jewel's like, "How are you doing that?" And Fang's like, "There's a finite amount of pain in the world. I've already had my share," which is an awesome line that makes very little actual sense, and Jewel immediately lampshades exactly that. With Jewel damaged, Fang throws the explosive they've prepared. Jewel deflects the bomb, and it explodes at the feet of the Green Brothers instead, killing them. Jewel's building goes up in flames, and the trio manage to escape. I think I could have explained how a little better. Suffice it to say, when you can fly, escaping is a thing you can do much more easily than people who can't fly. As Fang, Nudge, and Iggy fly away, Keegan flies alongside them and assures them they've done a good job, to keep trying. Fang is cold to her, expressing, but not speaking, that he holds similar opinions to everyone else about her not using her omnipotence to save the day. They also meet Headmaster for the first time, still unidentified, their hologram also projecting into the air beside them, and Headmaster is just there to assure them Jewel will be stopped by the Survivors organization, and the Survivors will triumph, and the Flock will play no part in all of this. As Fang and the other two fly home, they only hope they can get through this, so my hunch was right, there was no it. I get the feeling I know what happens in the 16th and final chapter, Chapter 16, called it! Chapter 16 opens with the words, 3 years later. Bam! I've always kind of had a thing for sudden, unexpected, massive time jumps. I love writing them. I just don't see a lot of stories that do that. You know, when Avengers Endgame had a big old 5 years later moment really early on, that was so fucking awesome to me because that's like my favorite thing to do in a story. Just whenever I have the opportunity to separate one story arc from the next with several years having passed, I dig it. This chapter, it's quite short. It's very, very short. Simply put, it's 3 years later. Jewel has gathered 100 people in an auditorium. He announces to them that he has completed the new version of the spider virus, which makes no sense. He just had one. Why would it take 3 years for him to produce another? Well, hey, this being my first time using my favorite plot device, can't expect me to have done it perfectly. So there's a pretty funny moment. This chapter is mostly just Jewel monologuing to his audience, and they're mostly silent, except at one point where some unidentified person in the crowd goes, "Woohoo!" That's funny. In the end, Jewel announces that before they unleash the virus, they want humanity to know that they're dying, and why. The factories, cars, everything else that humans do that's bad for the environment, Jewel's people are going to go throughout the world and get rid of that shit and kill everyone involved in it. Then the spider virus will kill everyone who's left. Painfully. The last words Jewel says are to remark that no human will remain, not even Maximum Ride, wherever she may be. So, had to sneak a little hint in there that, yeah, it's been 3 years and Max is still not returned, or at least that Jewel doesn't know where she is. So that, quite good. In my absence, was vastly superior to Max the ICBG. Gosh, especially here in the second half, so much stuff happened in that second half in particular that absolutely has to happen in Iris later. Yo. Anyway, the third book of the Max saga is called 1. That's right, the title is 1. I think my idea was like to call it 100 to represent Jewel's 100 people plan that's been talked about so much in this installment, but then apparently, well before actually publishing it, I decided to change the name of the book to 1, presumably referring to Max herself. And it's odd because it's called 1, even though it's the third book. You know, I was trying to be interesting, I guess. Not sure I succeeded. May have just been weird. You decide. And that's it for today, peeps. I'm in Quincy now. Can you believe it? Since I moved here, it's been difficult getting my life together. I struggle with executive functions like doing my dishes and my laundry and taking care of Sebastian, but I'll get a grip on it. Life will go on here, and Tapas will at last return to the creating of things. I can promise you that much. To finish us off, I'm very happy to present the new ending I now have to put at the end of every video on this channel. I'm so happy I finally get to do this. Check this out right here. Tapas and Stuff Productions is brought to you by our supporters on Patreon, including Knight Sadie Allen.